The helicopter was going to crash in front of 200 investors, and Vanessa Hale knew it. She had 48 hours to save a $70 million contract or watch her company collapse. Her best engineers couldn't fix it. The board was already preparing her termination papers. Then she saw him, the janitor with grease-stained hands, staring at her aircraft like he could see straight through the metal to whatever was broken inside. She didn't know his name. She didn't care. What she did know was this: humiliating him in front of everyone might be the cruelest thing she'd ever done. But Vanessa Hale hadn't gotten this far by being kind. If you want to see how far desperation can push two broken people towards something neither of them expected, stay with me until the end. And if this story reaches you, hit that like button and drop a comment with your city so I can see how far our story travels. The hangar smelled like aviation fuel and failure. Vanessa stood in the center of Holt Aerotech's main assembly floor, arms crossed, watching her lead engineer pull his headset off and shake his head for the third time in an hour. Around her, the cavernous space echoed with the sound of toolboxes slamming shut, frustrated voices cutting through radio static, and the low hum of industrial lighting that made everyone look exhausted even when they weren't. She was 30 years old, CEO for 14 months. The youngest person to ever run Holt Aerotech, and if things kept going the way they were going, she'd also be the shortest tenured. Ma'am, I'm telling you, we've checked everything. Derek Paulson, her head of engineering, wiped sweat from his forehead even though the hangar was cold enough to see your breath. Hydraulics are fine. Fuel systems clean. Avionics check out. There's no mechanical reason this bird shouldn't fly. Then why won't it fly, Derek? He flinched. Everyone flinched when Vanessa used that tone, the one that sounded like she was measuring you for a casket. I don't know. You don't know? No, ma'am. Vanessa turned away from him and stared at the helicopter sitting in the middle of the hangar like a 2-ton piece of modern art that had forgotten how to be useful. It was a prototype, sleek, black, worth more than most people's houses. The kind of aircraft that was supposed to change everything for a company like Holt Aerotech. Lightweight, fuel-efficient, stable in conditions that would turn other helicopters into expensive lawn ornaments. Except right now, it was just expensive. Behind her, she could hear Derek breathing too loud, the way people do when they're afraid of getting fired and trying not to show it. We have the demonstration in 48 hours, Vanessa said quietly. General Madison will be here. Senator Calloway. Executives from 3 different defense contractors. They're not flying across the country to watch us apologize. I understand that. Do you? She turned back to face him. Because if we don't deliver this contract, Holt Aerotech folds. 1,600 employees lose their jobs. Your pension disappears. My family's legacy dies with me. So when you tell me you don't know what's wrong, Derek, what I hear is that you've decided all of that is acceptable. His face went red. That's not fair. Fair? Vanessa laughed, and it came out sharp enough to cut. You think any of this is about fair? She didn't wait for him to respond. She was already walking toward the helicopter, her heels clicking against the concrete like a countdown timer nobody could stop. Around her, the engineering team scattered, suddenly very busy with tasks that didn't require making eye contact with their CEO. Vanessa Hale had a reputation. Cold, ruthless. The kind of woman who could fire you before lunch and forget your name by dinner. She knew what people said about her. She knew they were afraid of her. Good. Fear kept people sharp. Fear kept them from getting comfortable. And comfort was what killed companies like this one. Companies her grandfather had built with his bare hands back when people still believed in American manufacturing and a handshake meant something. She reached the helicopter and ran her hand along the fuselage, feeling the cool metal under her palm. Somewhere inside this machine was a problem her engineers couldn't find, and she had 2 days to solve it or lose everything. Ma'am? Vanessa didn't turn around. She knew that voice. Carol from HR, which meant bad news wrapped in corporate speak and delivered with a sympathetic smile that made you want to throw something. What is it, Carol? The board called. They want an update on the demonstration. Tell them it's handled. They were specific. They want to know if we're prepared to move forward or if we need to discuss contingency planning. Contingency planning. That was corporate for, we're getting ready to fire you. Tell them, Vanessa said slowly, that if they want updates, They can come down here and stand in this freezing hangar and watch their investment sit on the ground like a paperweight. Otherwise, they can wait until I'm ready to talk. Carol hesitated. They're not going to like that. I don't care what they like. She heard Carol's footsteps retreat across the concrete. Alone again, Vanessa pressed her forehead against the helicopter and closed her eyes. She was so tired. Tired of fighting. Tired of proving herself. Tired of being the only woman in every meeting, the youngest person in every boardroom, the one everyone was waiting to fail so they could say they knew it would happen. Her grandfather had built Holt Aerotech into something that mattered. Her father had expanded it into international markets. And she, Vanessa Hale, the disappointment daughter who'd spent her 20s building a consulting career instead of learning the family business, she was supposed to be the one who saved it. Except she didn't know how. Excuse me. Vanessa's eyes snapped open. The voice came from behind her, male, quiet, careful. She turned and found herself looking at a man in a gray maintenance uniform, holding a mop like he'd just been interrupted in the middle of cleaning up someone else's mess. She recognized him vaguely. Maintenance staff. One of the invisible people who kept the building running while everyone else focused on more important things. You're not supposed to be in this section, Vanessa said. I know. I was just finishing the North Bay and saw everyone gathered here. Figured something was wrong. He was looking past her. At the helicopter. Vanessa frowned. There was something about the way he was staring at it. Not like someone curious about expensive machinery, but like someone reading a language nobody else could see. What's your name? She asked. Mason. Mason what? Reed. Well, Mason Reed, unless you have an engineering degree I don't know about, I suggest you go back to whatever you were doing. Chase. He didn't move. He was still staring at the helicopter, and now Vanessa was starting to get annoyed. Is there a problem? She asked. Mason blinked, like he'd forgotten she was standing there. No, sorry, He stopped himself. You just what? Nothing. It's not my place. Your place is holding a mop, so yes, you're right. It's not your place. She expected him to leave. Instead, he shifted his weight, glanced at the helicopter again, and then met her eyes with an expression that was hard to read. Not afraid, not angry, just tired. The kind of tired that came from carrying something heavy for too long. Right, he said quietly. Sorry for bothering you. Well, he turned to leave, and Vanessa should have let him go, should have focused on the real problem in front of her. But something about the way he'd looked at the helicopter, like he understood it better than her entire engineering team, made her speak before she could stop herself. Wait. Mason stopped. You were staring at it like you know something. I don't know anything. Then why were you staring? Said. He hesitated. For a moment, Vanessa thought he might actually answer. Instead, he just shook his head. I should get back to work. And this time, she let him go. 20 minutes later, Derek found her still standing next to the helicopter, staring at nothing. Ma'am, we're going to keep running diagnostics overnight. Maybe we'll find something. Maybe isn't good enough. It's all we have right now. Vanessa didn't respond. She was thinking about the janitor, Mason Reed, and the way he'd looked at the helicopter like it was telling him a story nobody else could hear. Derek, how long has maintenance staff been allowed on the assembly floor? He frowned. They're not, usually. Why, what? There was a man here earlier, gray uniform, said his name was Mason Reed. Oh, Reed. He's harmless, does night shifts mostly, keeps to himself. What do you know about him? Derek shrugged. Not much. He's been here maybe 2 years, quiet guy, does his job. I think he's got a kid. I've seen him leaving at weird hours, probably picking her up from school or something. He was staring at the helicopter. So he was staring at it like he understood what was wrong with it. Derek laughed. Ma'am, with all due respect, the guy pushes a mop for a living. I'll show up. I doubt he knows the first thing about aviation engineering. Maybe Derek was right. Maybe Vanessa was so desperate for answers that she was imagining things that weren't there. Or maybe, just maybe, there was more to Mason Reed than a gray uniform and a mop. Find him, Vanessa said. What? Oh. Find Mason Reed. Bring him back here. I want to talk to him. Derek stared at her like she'd just suggested they solve the problem by sacrificing a goat. You're serious? Do I look like I'm joking? He didn't argue. 10 minutes later, Derek returned with Mason walking beside him, still holding his mop, looking confused and uncomfortable under the industrial lights. Vanessa stood in front of the helicopter, arms crossed, studying him. Up close, Mason Reed looked older than she'd first thought. Maybe 32, 33, dark hair that needed a cut, tired eyes, the kind of face that had seen things and decided not to talk about them. Mr. Reed, Vanessa said, I'm going to ask you a question, and I want an honest answer. Mason glanced at Derek, then back at her. Okay. When you were staring at this helicopter earlier, what were you thinking? He shifted his weight, uncomfortable. I wasn't thinking anything. You're lying. Ma'am, you looked at this aircraft like you could see exactly what was wrong with it. So I'm asking again, what were you thinking? The hangar had gone quiet. The engineering team had stopped working, all of them watching this strange confrontation between their CEO and a man whose job was literally to clean up after them. Mason's jaw tightened. I was thinking it's not my business. What if I make it your business? Then I'd say you're wasting your time. Why don't you let me decide that? For a long moment, Mason just looked at her. Then he sighed, and Vanessa saw something shift in his expression. Resignation, maybe. Or just exhaustion. The problem's not mechanical, he said quietly. Derek laughed. What are you talking about? Of course it's mechanical. What else would it be? Mason ignored him. He was still looking at Vanessa. You've checked the hydraulics, right? Fuel system? Avionics? Yes, Vanessa said. Everything checks out. Then you missed something. My engineers don't miss things. Everyone misses things. Mason set his mop down and walked toward the helicopter. The movement was so natural, so confident, that nobody stopped him. He circled the aircraft slowly, running his hand along the panels, checking connections, looking at things Vanessa couldn't name. Derek moved to intercept him. Hey, you can't just... Let him work, Vanessa said. Mason knelt beside one of the access panels and frowned. You got a flashlight? Someone handed him one. He clicked it on and shone it into the compartment, tilting his head like he was listening to something nobody else could hear. Then he reached in, felt around for something, and pulled his hand back out holding a small piece of metal. What is that? Vanessa asked. Mason held it up to the light. Shear pin. Looks like it broke off during your last test flight and got lodged in the control linkage. Hydraulics are fine. Fuel system's fine. But this little piece of metal was blocking the swash plate from moving freely. That's why your cyclic inputs weren't registering. The entire hangar went silent. Derek stared at the shear pin like Mason had just pulled a grenade out of the helicopter. That's not possible. We checked the linkage. You checked the main linkage, Mason said. This was stuck in the secondary control rod. Easy to miss if you're not looking for it. Vanessa took the shear pin from his hand and studied it. Tiny. Insignificant. The kind of thing that could ground a $70 million aircraft and destroy a company. She looked up at Mason. How did you know? He didn't answer right away. For a moment, she thought he wouldn't answer at all. Then he said very quietly, I used to work on helicopters. A long time ago. Where? Doesn't matter. It matters to me. Mason met her eyes, and for the first time, Vanessa saw something there besides exhaustion. Something guarded. Something that looked a lot like pain. I don't do that work anymore, he said. Why not? Because I made a choice, and I'm not going back. Before Vanessa could push further, one of the engineers called out from across the hangar. Ma'am, we need you to look at something. She turned, frustrated by the interruption, and when she looked back, Mason had already picked up his mop and started walking away. Wait, Vanessa said. I'm not done talking to you. Mason stopped but didn't turn around. I need to pick up my daughter from after-school care. I'm already late. Your daughter can wait 5 minutes. Well, no, Mason said quietly. She can't. And then he was gone, disappearing through the side door before Vanessa could stop him. Derek was still staring at the shear pin. How the hell did he find that? Vanessa didn't answer. She was thinking about the way Mason had moved around the helicopter. Confident, precise, like muscle memory taking over before his brain could stop it. He wasn't just someone who used to work on helicopters. but shopwrights. He was someone who understood them better than anyone else in this building. Derek, Vanessa said slowly, I want you to pull Mason Reed's employment file. I want to know everything about him. Where he worked before, what he did, why he's here. You think he's lying about something? Osibo? I think, Vanessa said, still staring at the door Mason had disappeared through, that our janitor just solved a problem none of you could figure out. And I want to know why he's pushing a mop instead of building helicopters. That night, Vanessa sat in her office on the top floor of Holt Aerotech, staring at Mason Reed's personnel file. It was thin, too thin. Employment history, 2 years at Holt Aerotech, maintenance and custodial services. Before that, a 3-year gap with no listed employment. Before that, military service, U.S. Army, honorable discharge. No details, no specialization. Nothing that explained how a man with a mop had diagnosed a mechanical failure that stumped her entire engineering team. Vanessa picked up her phone and called Derek. I need you to reinstall that shear pin. What? Why? Because I want to make sure Mason Reed wasn't just lucky. Ma'am, he found the problem. The demonstration's back on. Why does it matter how he... Just do it, Derek. She hung up before he could argue. Outside her office window, the airfield stretched into darkness. Runway lights blinking like distant stars. Somewhere out there, Mason Reed was probably putting his daughter to bed, reading her a story, doing all the normal things normal parents did. Except Mason Reed wasn't normal. And Vanessa Hale was going to find out why. The next morning, Vanessa arrived at the hangar before sunrise. The helicopter was sitting in the same spot, Derek and his team already running diagnostics. When he saw her, Derek looked up with an expression that was half exhaustion, half resignation. We reinstalled the shear pin like you asked. Same problem. Cyclic inputs not registering. Reed was right. Good, Bosa Vanessa said. Now, bring him back. Ma'am, Derek, I'm not asking. 20 minutes later, Mason Reed walked into the hangar carrying a worn backpack and looking like he'd rather be anywhere else. Vanessa stood in front of the helicopter, waiting. Mr. Reed, she said, thank you for coming. Mason glanced at the helicopter, then at her. I'm supposed to be working the North Wing right now. You'll be working here instead. I'm not an engineer. No, Vanessa said. You're better than that. Mason's expression didn't change, but something flickered behind his eyes. What do you want? Vanessa gestured to the helicopter. I want you to fix it, again. Except this time, I want you to do it in front of everyone. She raised her voice so the entire engineering team could hear. We reinstalled the shear pin. The problem's back. And I want to see if yesterday was luck, or if you actually know what you're doing. Mason stared at her. You're testing me. Yes. Why? Because, Vanessa said, walking closer to him, if you can fix this helicopter, it means you've been lying about who you are. And I don't like liars. The hangar had gone completely silent. Every engineer, every technician, every person in that building was watching. Mason's jaw tightened. I told you, I don't do this work anymore. Then you're fired. What? You heard me. If you're not willing to fix this aircraft, then I have no use for you. Pack your things and leave. Derek stepped forward. Ma'am, that's... Stay out of this, Derek. Vanessa kept her eyes locked on Mason. She could see the anger building in his expression, the way his hands were clenching into fists. Good. She wanted him angry. Angry people made mistakes. Angry people told the truth. You can't fire me for refusing to do a job I wasn't hired for. Mason said quietly, I can fire you for anything I want. This is my company. Then you're as bad as everyone says you are. The words hit harder than Vanessa expected. For a moment, just a moment, she felt something crack in the armor she'd spent years building, but she didn't let it show. Maybe I am, she said, but at least I'm honest about it. Can you say the same? Mason stared at her for a long time. Then he dropped his backpack on the floor, walked to the helicopter, and yanked open the access panel with enough force to make the metal screech. Fine, he said. You want me to fix it? I'll fix it. Vanessa watched him work, watched the way his hands moved with absolute certainty, no hesitation, no wasted motion. Watched the way he found the shear pin in under 30 seconds and removed it like he'd done it 1,000 times before. Around her, the engineering team watched in silence. Mason straightened, holding the shear pin, and turned to face her. "It's fixed," he said flatly. "Happy?" "No," Vanessa said, "because now I know you've been lying to me." "I never lied. You said you used to work on helicopters. That's not the whole truth, is it?" Mason didn't answer. He just picked up his backpack and started walking toward the door. "Where are you going?" Vanessa called after him. "To find a new job, since you just fired me." "I didn't fire you. You said..." "I said if you refused to fix the helicopter, you were fired. You fixed it, so you still have a job." Mason stopped, turned around slowly. "What kind of game are you playing?" "You stay... "No game," Vanessa said. "I need that helicopter ready for the demonstration in 36 hours. And I need someone I can trust to make sure it doesn't fail. That person is you." "I'm a janitor." "You're a liar, Vanessa said. "But you're a talented liar. And right now, talent is more important than honesty." Mason stared at her like she'd lost her mind. Maybe she had. "I can't," he said finally. "Why not?" "Because I have responsibilities. I have a daughter. I can't just drop everything and..." "I'll pay you triple your current salary. And I'll make sure your daughter's school gets whatever resources it needs. New equipment, better funding, whatever she needs to succeed." Mason's expression shifted. For the first time, Vanessa saw something besides anger there. Something that looked like hope. "Why would you do that?" he asked quietly. "Because," Vanessa said, "I'm running out of options, and you're the only person in this building who seems to actually understand what they're doing." It was a lie. Not entirely, but close enough. The truth was, Vanessa didn't know why she was doing this. Didn't know why this quiet, damaged man with a mop had gotten under her skin in a way nobody else had in years. All she knew was that when he looked at that helicopter, he saw something she didn't, and she needed to understand what that was. Mason was quiet for a long time. Then he said, very quietly, "My daughter's school has a robotics workshop. They shut it down 3 months ago because of budget cuts. She's been trying to finish her competition project in the dark ever since." "Done," Vanessa said immediately. "I'll have the power restored by tomorrow. You can't just..." "Yes, I can. Is that all you want?" Mason looked at her like he was trying to figure out whether she was serious. Then he nodded slowly. "Okay," he said. "I'll help you, but only until the demonstration. After that, I'm gone." Agreed. Mason dropped his backpack again and walked back to the helicopter. As he opened the panel and started inspecting the systems, Vanessa felt something strange and unfamiliar settle in her chest. Relief, maybe. Or something close to it. She didn't know Mason Reed's full story yet. Didn't know why he was hiding or what he was running from. But she was going to find out. And something told her that when she did, everything was going to change. Mason worked through the night. Not because Vanessa asked him to, not because he wanted to prove anything, but because once he started, once his hands remembered what they used to know, stopping felt worse than continuing. The hangar emptied around midnight. Derek and his team filed out one by one, exhausted, leaving Mason alone with the helicopter and the sound of his own breathing. He should have left too. Should have gone home to Chloe, made sure she'd eaten dinner, helped her with homework, done all the things a good father was supposed to do. But Mrs. Chen from next door was watching her tonight. Had been watching her a lot of nights lately. And Chloe understood. She always understood, even when she shouldn't have to. Mason ran his hand along the control linkage, feeling for stress points, microfractures, anything that might cause problems during the demonstration. The work came back to him like breathing, automatic, necessary, something his body remembered even when his mind tried to forget. He'd spent 6 years building helicopters for the military. 6 years in workshops that smelled like hydraulic fluid and desert sand, assembling aircraft that would carry soldiers into places they might not come back from. He'd been good at it, better than good. The kind of engineer people requested by name when they needed something done right. And then Sarah died, and everything else stopped mattering. The cancer took 18 months. 18 months of hospital rooms and experimental treatments, and watching the woman he loved disappear piece by piece, while their daughter learned what it meant to lose someone before she was old enough to understand death. After the funeral, Mason tried going back to work. Tried pretending he could still care about hydraulic systems and fuel efficiency when his daughter was learning to sleep alone in a house that felt too big and too quiet. It lasted 3 weeks. He quit, cashed out his savings, moved to upstate New York because it was far away from everything that reminded him of before. Got a job that didn't require thinking, didn't require caring, didn't require him to be anything except present. Being a janitor meant he could pick Chloe up from school, could help with homework, could be there when she woke up crying in the middle of the night because she forgot, just for a second, that her mother wasn't coming back. It meant giving up everything he used to be. But Mason had made peace with that, or at least he thought he had until Vanessa Hale forced him to remember. "You're still here." Mason turned. Vanessa stood in the hangar entrance, silhouetted against the parking lot lights, holding 2 paper cups that were steaming in the cold air. "Thought you went home," Mason said. "I did. Then I couldn't sleep." She walked toward him, footsteps echoing. "Figured you might want coffee." "I'm fine." "You've been working for 8 hours straight. You're not fine." She held out one of the cups. Mason hesitated, then took it. The coffee was terrible, weak and bitter at the same time, but it was warm, and he was cold, so he drank it anyway. Vanessa leaned against the workbench, studying him. "How much longer?" "Another few hours. Maybe more. The linkage is solid, but I want to check the swash plate bearings. If those fail during the demonstration, I know what happens if they fail." "Then you know I cannot rush this." Vanessa was quiet for a moment. Then she said, "Derek told me you refused overtime pay. I don't need it. Everyone needs money. Not as much as they think they do." She frowned. "That's either very wise or very stupid." "Probably both." Mason turned back to the helicopter, hoping she'd take the hint and leave. Instead, she set her coffee down and moved closer, watching him work. "Where did you serve?" she asked. "Afghanistan? Iraq? Couple other places they don't put on the recruitment posters." "Aviation engineer?" "Flight systems specialist? Rotary wing." "That's a fancy way of saying you built helicopters. That's a fancy way of saying I kept them from killing the people flying them." Vanessa was quiet. Mason could feel her watching him, trying to piece together a story from fragments that didn't fit. "You were good at it," she said finally. "How do you know?" "Because you move like someone who's done this 10,000 times, and people don't get that good at something unless they care about it." Mason didn't respond. He didn't want to talk about caring. Caring was what got you hurt. "So what happened?" Vanessa asked. "Why'd you stop?" "I made a choice." "That's not an answer." "It's the only one you're getting at." He expected her to push, expected the same ruthless interrogation she'd used in front of the engineering team. Instead, she just nodded slowly. "Fair enough." She picked up her coffee and started walking toward the door. Mason should have let her go, should have focused on the work in front of him and nothing else. But something made him speak. "Why are you really doing this?" Vanessa stopped, turned around. "Doing what?" "Restoring power to my daughter's school, paying me triple my salary, staying here at 2 a.m. drinking bad coffee. You don't need to do any of that." "Maybe I want to." Nobody wants to help a janitor they met yesterday. Vanessa walked back toward him, and for the first time since he'd met her, Mason saw something in her expression that wasn't anger or calculation. Something that looked almost human. "My grandfather built this company," she said quietly. "Spent 40 years turning it into something that mattered. My father expanded it, made it profitable, made it respected. And then he died. And the board gave me his job because they thought I'd be easy to control." She laughed, but there was no humor in it. "They were wrong. I've spent the last year fighting them on everything, every decision, every policy, every hire. They're waiting for me to fail so they can replace me with someone who'll do what they're told." "So prove them wrong," Mason said. "I'm trying, But it's hard to prove anything when your best engineers can't solve a problem that a janitor figured out in 30 seconds. Mason understood then. This wasn't about the helicopter. It was about Vanessa needing to believe she hadn't made a mistake by trusting him, that her instincts were still good, that she was still in control. I didn't solve anything, Mason said. I just saw something your team missed. Don't do that. Do what? Pretend you're not talented. Pretend this doesn't matter to you. I watched you work, Mason. You care about this helicopter more than anyone else in this building. I care about my daughter more. I know, Vanessa said. That's why I believe you. She finished her coffee and crushed the cup in her hand. The demonstration's in 30 hours. Get some sleep. I need you functional, not halfway to a stroke. I'll sleep when it's done. That's an order, not a suggestion. Mason looked up at her. You're not my commanding officer, Saab. No, Vanessa said. I'm worse. I'm your boss. And if you collapse from exhaustion before this demonstration, I'll make sure your daughter's school loses funding for the next decade. She was bluffing. Probably. But Mason was too tired to argue. 4 hours, he said. Then I'm back. 6. 5. Vanessa smiled. It was small, barely there, but real. Fine, 5 hours. Don't be late. She left, and Mason was alone again with the helicopter and the quiet. He worked for another hour, finishing the bearing inspection, running diagnostics, making sure everything was perfect. Then he packed up his tools, grabbed his jacket, and walked out into the parking lot where the November cold hit him like a wall. His truck was the only vehicle left. 10 years old, rust spreading across the wheel wells. Passenger door held shut with duct tape. It started on the third try, engine coughing like it was trying to remember how to be useful. Mason drove home through empty streets, past closed diners and gas stations, through neighborhoods where people were asleep and dreaming about problems that didn't involve helicopters or contracts or choices they couldn't take back. He pulled into the driveway of a small house with peeling paint and a front porch light that flickered every time the wind blew. Mrs. Chen's car was still in the driveway. She met him at the door, already putting on her coat. She's asleep, Mrs. Chen said. Finished her homework, ate dinner, asked about you 3 times. I'm sorry, work ran late. She understands. That girl's tougher than most adults I know. Mrs. Chen patted his arm. You look terrible, Mason. When's the last time you slept? I'll sleep tomorrow. That's what you said yesterday. Tomorrow, I mean it. Mrs. Chen shook her head but didn't argue. She'd been their neighbor for 2 years, watched Chloe more times than Mason could count, never asked for anything except to be paid on time and told when he'd be late. After she left, Mason locked the door and walked upstairs to Chloe's room. She was curled up under a blanket covered in stars, one arm wrapped around a stuffed rabbit Sarah had given her before she got too sick to leave the hospital. Mason sat on the edge of her bed and brushed hair away from her face. 7 years old, small for her age, smart enough to skip a grade but refusing because she didn't want to leave her friends behind. She had Sarah's eyes, Sarah's smile, Sarah's stubborn refusal to give up on things, even when giving up was the logical choice. Dad? Mason froze. He thought she was asleep. Chloe blinked up at him, groggy and confused. You're home. I'm home. Mrs. Chen said you were working on something important. Just fixing a helicopter. For your new job? No, baby. Same job. Just helping with something else for a little while. Chloe sat up, rubbing her eyes. Is it cool? The helicopter? Yeah. Mason thought about it. Yeah, it's pretty cool. Can I see it? Maybe. After the demonstration. What's a demonstration? It's when people who might buy the helicopter come to watch it fly. If they like it, the company gets paid. If they don't, a lot of people lose their jobs. Chloe frowned. Including you? Maybe. That's stupid. Mason smiled. Yeah, kind of is. Chloe was quiet for a moment. Then she said, Dad, can I ask you something? Always. Do you miss fixing helicopters? Size. The question hit harder than Mason expected. He wanted to lie. Wanted to tell her no, that he was happy pushing a mop, that he didn't wake up sometimes with his hands aching to hold tools and solve problems that actually mattered. But Chloe deserved better than lies. Yeah, he said quietly. I miss it.
Then why did you stop? Because you needed me more. But I'm okay now. I know you are. So maybe, Chloe said carefully, maybe you could do both. Fix helicopters and be my dad.
Mason pulled her into a hug. She was getting bigger, growing up faster than he wanted. Someday soon she wouldn't need him the way she did now, and he didn't know what he'd do when that day came.
Maybe, he said.
We'll see. That's what you always say when the answer's no. Sometimes the answer's, I don't know yet. Chloe pulled back and looked at him seriously. You should do it.
Dad, Mom would want you to.
And just like that, Mason's chest felt too tight to breathe.
He kissed her forehead. Go back to sleep, baby. We'll talk about it tomorrow. Promise?
Promise. She settled back under the blanket, eyes already closing. Mason waited until her breathing slowed, then stood and walked to his own room. He lay down on top of the covers, still dressed, staring at the ceiling. Sleep didn't come. Instead, his mind kept circling back to the helicopter, to Vanessa's expression when he'd fixed the shear pin, to the way his hands had remembered skills he thought he'd buried along with everything else. Chloe was right. Sarah would have wanted him to keep building helicopters, would have hated watching him give up the thing he loved because she was gone. But Sarah wasn't here. And Mason had learned the hard way that what people wanted and what they got were usually two different things. His phone buzzed. A text from an unknown number. Power's being restored to the school tomorrow morning. Robotics workshop will be operational by noon. VH Mason stared at the message. Vanessa had actually done it. Kept her promise. Fixed something that had been broken for months in less than 24 hours. He should have felt grateful. Instead, he just felt trapped. Because now he owed her. And owing people meant they could ask for things. And Mason had nothing left to give except the one thing he'd sworn never to touch again. He didn't reply to the message, just set the phone down and closed his eyes, and tried not to think about how much easier everything had been when he didn't care about helicopters or CEOs or promises he shouldn't have made. Sleep came eventually, restless and thin, filled with dreams about aircraft falling from the sky and Chloe asking questions he didn't know how to answer. 5 hours later, his alarm went off, and Mason dragged himself out of bed and back into the fight. The hangar was already full when he arrived. Engineers everywhere, running final checks, arguing over specifications, moving with the frantic energy of people who knew they were running out of time.
Vanessa stood in the center of it all, talking to a man in a suit who looked expensive and annoyed. When she saw Mason, she excused herself and walked over. You look terrible, she said.
Good morning to you, too. Did you sleep? 5 hours, like you ordered.
Liar. You got maybe 3. Mason didn't argue. What do you need?
Final systems check. Derek says everything's green, but I want you to confirm. You don't trust your own engineers? I trust you more. The words should have meant nothing. Should have just been corporate strategy, a CEO managing her assets. But the way Vanessa said it, direct, honest, like she actually believed it, made something shift in Mason's chest. I'll check it, he said. He spent the next 2 hours going over every system, every connection, every component that could fail. The helicopter was perfect, better than perfect. Derek's team had done good work, but Mason kept checking anyway, because perfect wasn't good enough when people's lives depended on it. And even though this was just a demonstration, even though nobody would die if something went wrong, muscle memory didn't care about context. Around noon, Vanessa found him in the maintenance bay, reviewing hydraulic pressure readings for the 3rd time. Mason, almost done. Mason, it's ready. You need to stop. Just one more. Stop. He looked up. Vanessa was standing closer than he expected, close enough that he could see the exhaustion in her eyes, the tension in her shoulders, the way she was holding herself together through sheer force of will. It's going to work, she said quietly. You fixed it. It's going to work. You don't know that. Yes, I do, because you don't do anything halfway. I've been watching you for 2 days, and you check everything like your life depends on it. It's not my life I'm worried about. Vanessa studied him for a long moment. Then she said, Your daughter's school called. The robotics workshop is operational. Chloe's already there, working on her project. Mason felt something loosen in his chest. Thank you. Don't thank me. You earned it. I didn't earn anything. I just found a piece of metal. You found a problem nobody else could solve. That's worth more than you think. She turned to leave, then stopped. The demonstration starts in 6 hours. Go home, shower, eat something, spend time with your daughter. The helicopter's ready. You're not. I'm fine. You're running on fumes and coffee, and I need you functional for what comes next. Mason frowned. What comes next? Vanessa met his eyes, and for the first time since he'd met her, she looked uncertain. I want you at the demonstration, she said. Not as a janitor, as an engineer. No, Mason. I said no. I fixed your helicopter. That was the deal. I'm not getting on stage and pretending to be something I'm not. You're not pretending. You are an engineer. A better engineer than most of the people working here. I was an engineer. Past tense. Why? Vanessa's voice rose, frustration bleeding through. Why are you so determined to waste your talent cleaning floors? Because cleaning floors doesn't get people killed. Oh, the words came out harder than Mason intended. Vanessa stepped back, something shifting in her expression. What happened? She asked quietly. Nothing that's any of your business. If it's affecting your work, it's not affecting anything. The helicopter's fixed. The demonstration will go fine. And tomorrow I'll go back to my regular job and we can both pretend this never happened. Vanessa stared at him. Then she did something Mason didn't expect. She laughed. It wasn't a happy sound. It was bitter and sharp and full of recognition. You think I don't understand? She said. You think I don't know what it's like to give up everything because you're afraid of failing again? This isn't about fear. Yes, it is. You're terrified. Terrified that if you go back to being an engineer, you'll remember what it felt like to care about something besides your daughter. And you can't handle that because caring means risking loss. Mason's hands clenched into fists. You don't know anything about me. I know you're lying to yourself. I know you've been lying for years. And I know that working on this helicopter is the first time you felt alive since your wife died. The mention of Sarah made something snap inside him. Don't, Mason said quietly. Don't pretend you understand what I lost. You're right, I don't understand, because I've never let myself care about anyone enough to lose them. The honesty in her voice surprised him. Mason looked at Vanessa, really looked at her, and saw something he recognized. The same exhaustion he felt every morning when he woke up and remembered Sarah was gone. The same loneliness that came from pushing everyone away because it was easier than letting them close. They were more alike than he wanted to admit. I can't be at the demonstration, Mason said finally. I'm sorry, but I can't. Vanessa nodded slowly. Okay, but if you change your mind, I won't. The offer stands. She walked away, and Mason was alone again with the helicopter and the weight of choices he couldn't take back. He left the hangar an hour later, drove to Chloe's school, found her in the robotics workshop, surrounded by wires and circuit boards, building something that looked like a small robot with too many arms. She looked up when he walked in, and her face lit up with the kind of pure joy that made every sacrifice worth it. Dad, look! The lights work! I can actually see what I'm doing! Mason knelt beside her, looking at the half-finished robot. What is it? A sorting robot. It's supposed to organize recycling by material type. See, you put something in here and the sensors identify whether it's plastic or metal or paper, and then these arms move it to the right container. Does it work? Not yet, but it will. I just need to fix the sensor calibration. She paused. Can you help me? Mason looked at his daughter, 7 years old, building robots, asking for his help not because she needed it, but because she wanted to share this with him. Yeah, he said, I can help. They worked together for the next hour. Mason showed her how to calibrate the sensors, how to adjust the servo motors, how to debug code when the robot did something unexpected. It was different from helicopters, smaller and simpler, but the principles were the same. Problem solving. Systems thinking. Making something work that was designed to fail. Chloe was good at it, better than good. She saw connections he had to explain to adult engineers, understood concepts that should have been beyond her age. She had Sarah's intelligence. And maybe, Mason thought, a little bit of his mechanical intuition. There, Chloe said finally, as the robot successfully sorted a plastic bottle into the correct container. It works! It works, Mason agreed. Chloe threw her arms around him. Thank you, Dad. You did all the hard parts. I just helped with the calibration. But you knew how. You always know how to fix things. Mason held her close, feeling the weight of her words settle somewhere deep in his chest. He did know how to fix things. Had always known. And for the last 3 years, he'd been pretending that knowledge didn't matter, that he could be happy just existing instead of building. But Chloe saw through it, had been seen through it for a while now. Dad, she said quietly, are you going to the helicopter demonstration tomorrow? No, baby, that's not my job. But you fixed it. You should be there. It's complicated. That's another thing you say when the answer's no. Mason pulled back and looked at her seriously. Why do you want me to go so badly? Chloe bit her lip, thinking. Then she said, because when you were helping me just now, you looked happy, really happy, and you don't look like that when you're cleaning. The truth of it hit him like a physical blow. I'm happy when I'm with you, Mason said. I know, but you can be both, Dad. Happy with me and happy with helicopters. You don't have to choose. Sometimes you do have to choose. Why? It was such a simple question, such a child's question, and Mason didn't have a good answer. Because he was afraid? Because guilt made him think he didn't deserve to enjoy work again? Because admitting he wanted to go back to engineering felt like betraying Sarah's memory? All of it. None of it. Everything in between. I'll think about it, Mason said finally. Chloe smiled. Okay, but think fast. The demonstration's tomorrow. They packed up the robot and drove home. That evening, Mason made dinner, spaghetti, Chloe's favorite, and they ate while she told him about her plans for improving the sorting algorithm and maybe adding a third arm for handling glass. After dinner, after homework, after the bedtime routine that had become sacred ritual, Mason sat in the living room and stared at his phone. Vanessa's message was still there. Power's being restored to the school tomorrow morning. She'd kept her promise. Fixed something important to Chloe in less than a day. And Mason had kept his promise too. Fixed the helicopter. Made sure the demonstration would succeed. They were even. Except they weren't. Because Vanessa had offered him something more than money or resources. She'd offered him a chance to remember who he used to be. And Mason didn't know if he was brave enough to take it. His phone buzzed again. Another message from Vanessa. I meant what I said. The offer stands. If you change your mind, be at the hangar at 0800. VH Mason stared at the message for a long time. Then he set the phone down and went to bed. He didn't sleep, just lay in the dark, thinking about helicopters and daughters and choices that felt impossible until you made them. Somewhere around 3 in the morning, he got up and walked to his closet. In the back, buried under old jackets and boxes of Sarah's things he couldn't bring himself to sort through, was a garment bag he hadn't opened in 3 years. Mason unzipped it slowly. Inside was his dress uniform, Air Force blue, pressed and clean and waiting for someone who didn't exist anymore. He ran his hand over the fabric, feeling the weight of memories attached to it, award ceremonies, promotions. The day Sarah pinned his rank insignia and told him she was proud of him. The day of her funeral, when he'd worn it one last time and sworn he'd never put it on again. Mason zipped the bag closed and put it back in the closet. But he didn't go back to bed. Instead, he sat at the kitchen table and watched the sun come up through the window, thinking about all the versions of himself he'd left behind and wondering if any of them could still be saved. At 7:30, his alarm went off. At 7:45, Chloe came downstairs for breakfast and found him already dressed, staring at his coffee like it held answers he hadn't found anywhere else. Dad, are you okay? Mason looked up at his daughter, 7 years old, too smart for her own good. Sarah's eyes looking at him with concern that no child should have to feel. Yeah, baby, he said. I'm okay. Are you going to work? Maybe. I haven't decided yet. Chloe walked over and hugged him. Whatever you choose, Dad, I'm proud of you. And just like that, Mason knew what he had to do. Mason dropped Chloe at school at 7:55 and sat in the parking lot for 10 minutes, engine running, hands gripping the steering wheel hard enough to hurt. He could still turn around, could drive to the hangar, park in the employee lot, change into his gray uniform, and spend the day mopping floors while Vanessa's demonstration happened without him. Nobody would blame him. Nobody except Chloe, who'd asked him one simple question he still couldn't answer. Why? At 8:15, Mason put the truck in gear and drove toward Holt Aerotech. The parking lot was already full. Black sedans and luxury SUVs crowded the visitor spaces, government plates mixed with corporate rentals. Mason recognized the setup: military brass and civilian executives, the kind of people who made decisions worth millions based on 30 minutes of watching metal fly. He parked in the back and walked toward the main entrance. His ID badge still worked, which surprised him. He half expected security to stop him, to tell him custodial staff weren't allowed during official demonstrations. But the guard just nodded and waved him through. The hangar had been transformed. Temporary seating lined one wall, already filling with men in suits and women in business attire who looked like they'd rather be anywhere else. A podium stood near the helicopter, microphone testing producing feedback that made everyone wince. Catering tables held coffee and pastries nobody was eating. Nobody. Mason stayed near the back, trying to be invisible. He spotted Derek near the helicopter, conducting last-minute checks with 2 other engineers. Vanessa stood near the podium, talking to a man with 4 stars on his uniform who looked like he'd been disappointed by better people than her. She hadn't seen him yet. Mason could still leave. Then Vanessa turned, scanning the crowd, and her eyes locked on his. For a moment, neither of them moved. Then Vanessa excused herself from the general and started walking toward Mason with an expression he couldn't read. "You came," she said when she reached him. "Yeah, I didn't think you would." "Neither did I." Vanessa studied him, and Mason saw something shift in her expression. Surprise, maybe, or relief, or something closer to gratitude. "Thank you," she said quietly. "I'm just here to watch. That's it. That's enough." Before Mason could respond, someone called Vanessa's name. She glanced back, then looked at Mason again. "Stay close, please." Then she was gone, pulled back into conversations with people who looked important and impatient. The demonstration started at 9. Vanessa took the podium and delivered a speech about innovation and American manufacturing and the future of rotary wing aviation. She was good at it, confident, precise, hitting talking points without sounding rehearsed. The audience listened with polite attention that Mason recognized as barely concealed skepticism. They'd heard promises before. They wanted proof. After the speech, Derek and his team began the pre-flight check. Mason watched from the back, hands in his pockets, fighting the urge to walk over and verify everything himself. The helicopter sat in the center of the hangar, spotlights making the black paint gleam, looking exactly like what it was supposed to be. The future, if the future cooperated. Derek climbed into the cockpit. The crowd quieted. Vanessa stood near the podium, arms crossed, face carefully neutral. Mason held his breath. The engine started. Smooth and clean, no hesitation. The rotors began turning, slowly at first, then faster, building speed until the sound filled the entire hangar and made conversation impossible. Derek ran through the checklist. Control checks, hydraulic pressure, systems verification, everything green. Then he lifted off. The helicopter rose 6 feet off the ground, steady and controlled, hanging in the air like it was being held by invisible strings. Derek rotated it slowly, demonstrating stability, then moved forward, backward, side to side. Every movement precise, every system responding exactly as designed. Mason felt something tight in his chest start to loosen. It was working. The helicopter was working. Around him, the audience leaned forward, skepticism shifting toward interest. The general made a note on his tablet. Senator Calloway, Mason recognized her from news coverage, whispered something to her aide. Derek brought the helicopter back to center and held it there for 10 seconds. Then he set it down. Smooth landing, no bounce, rotors already spinning down. Perfect. The crowd applauded. Not enthusiastically, but genuinely. Derek climbed out of the cockpit, grinning, and Vanessa allowed herself a small smile. Mason started to relax. They'd done it. The demonstration was a success. Then the general stood up. "Ms. Hale, that was impressive, but I have a question." Vanessa's smile didn't change, but Mason saw her shoulders tense. "Of course, General Madison. Your prototype performed well under controlled conditions, but we need aircraft that can handle stress, combat conditions, equipment failure.
How does your helicopter respond when something goes wrong? Vanessa's face went carefully blank. We've conducted extensive testing. I'm sure you have, but I'd like to see something unscripted.
The general looked at Derek. Can you simulate a hydraulic failure? Let's see how she handles with degraded systems. The hangar went quiet. Derek glanced at Vanessa, who gave a slight nod. Yes, sir, Derek said. Give me a few minutes to set that up. Mason's stomach dropped. Simulating hydraulic failure meant shutting down the backup pump and flying on primary systems only. It was doable, but dangerous. One mistake and the helicopter could lose control, could crash, could turn a successful demonstration into a disaster that killed the contract. Derek and his team climbed back into the aircraft. Mason heard them arguing through the open door. Derek wanted to refuse. One of the other engineers was saying it was too risky. A third was insisting they could handle it. Vanessa stood frozen near the podium, trapped between refusing the general's request and risking everything on an unplanned test. Mason found himself moving before he consciously decided to. He walked across the hangar, through the crowd, straight to the helicopter.
Derek, he said quietly, don't do this. Derek turned, surprised. Reed, what are you doing here? Stopping you from making a mistake. I don't have a choice.
The general asked if you could simulate failure. He didn't say you had to do it right now, in a closed hangar, with no safety protocols in place. We know what we're doing. No, you don't. Mason kept his voice low, urgent. You've been flying this prototype for 3 weeks. I built helicopters like this for 6 years in combat zones, and I'm telling you, if you shut down that backup pump without proper preparation, you're going to lose control. Derek's face flushed. Are you questioning my competence? I'm questioning your judgment. There's a difference. I don't have time for this. Derek started to turn away. Security, can we please? The swashplate bearings are new, Mason said, loud enough that everyone nearby could hear. They haven't been stressed yet. If you force asymmetric loading on untested bearings, they'll bind. You'll lose cyclic authority. The aircraft will enter an uncommanded roll, and you won't be able to correct it before you hit the ground. The entire hangar had gone silent. Everyone was staring at Mason, the janitor in civilian clothes, challenging the lead engineer in front of military brass and corporate executives. Vanessa appeared beside him. Mason, what are you doing? Saving your demonstration. By telling everyone we can't perform the test? By making sure nobody dies trying, Saab. The general walked over, moving with the kind of authority that made people step aside without being asked. He looked at Mason with sharp, assessing eyes. Who are you? The general asked. Mason hesitated. This was it. The moment where he could walk away, could let Derek make his own mistakes, could go back to being invisible. Or he could tell the truth. Mason Reed, former Army Flight Systems specialist. I rebuilt this helicopter 3 days ago after your engineers couldn't figure out what was wrong with it. The general's eyebrows rose. Is that true, Ms. Hale? Vanessa's jaw tightened. For a second, Mason thought she might deny it, might throw him under the bus to save face. Instead, she said, Yes, sir. Mr. Reed identified and repaired a mechanical failure that our engineering team missed. Reed, and you're saying the test is too dangerous? The general asked Mason. I'm saying it's dangerous without proper preparation. Give me 2 hours to stress test the bearings and verify the backup systems. Then you can simulate any failure you want. We don't have 2 hours, Derek said. General Madison's flight leaves at noon. Then reschedule the demonstration, Mason said. Better to delay than to crash. The general studied Mason for a long moment. Then he looked at Vanessa. Is he right about the bearings? Vanessa turned to Derek. Well? Derek's face had gone pale. The bearings are new. We installed them yesterday. They're rated for the stress, but we haven't... He stopped. We haven't tested them under asymmetric loading. So Reed is right, the general said. The test could fail. It's within acceptable risk parameters, Derek said, but his voice had lost conviction. The general shook his head. Son, I've been flying helicopters since before you were born. And acceptable risk parameters is what commanders say right before they lose aircraft and write letters to parents. He turned back to Vanessa. Ms. Hale, I'm impressed with your prototype. But I'm not interested in watching it crash to prove a point. If Reed can make the test safe, give him the time he needs. Vanessa looked at Mason. He could see her calculating, weighing options, trying to decide if trusting him again was brilliant or suicidal. 2 hours, she said finally. Can you do it? Yes. Then do it. She turned to the crowd. Ladies and gentlemen, we're going to take a brief intermission. Please help yourselves to refreshments. The demonstration will resume at 11:30. The audience started murmuring, some frustrated, others curious. The general nodded at Mason with something that looked like respect, then walked back to his seat. Derek grabbed Mason's arm. If you're wrong about this, I'm not wrong. You better not be, because if this demonstration fails, we all lose our jobs, including you. Mason pulled his arm free. Then I guess we better make sure it works. He climbed into the helicopter before anyone could stop him. The cockpit smelled like new electronics and hydraulic fluid, familiar and foreign at the same time. His hands found controls he hadn't touched in years, muscle memory taking over like no time had passed at all. Derek climbed in beside him. What do you need? Toolbox, torque wrench, hydraulic pressure gauge, and everyone else out of the aircraft. I'm staying. Derek, this is still my project. You might be fixing it, but I'm watching every move you make. Mason didn't have time to argue. Fine, just don't touch anything. For the next hour, Mason worked. He pulled the swash plate assembly, inspected every bearing, checked tolerances, measured wear patterns that shouldn't exist yet but did. Derek watched in silence, occasionally handing him tools, slowly realizing that Mason knew this aircraft better than anyone else in the building. Where did you learn to do this? Derek asked finally. Forward operating bases, places where if you couldn't fix it yourself, people died waiting for parts that never came. You were Army? Yeah. Why'd you leave? Mason didn't answer. He was focused on reinstalling the swash plate, torquing bolts to exact specifications, making sure everything was perfect. When he finished, he ran a full systems check. Hydraulics, control linkages, backup systems. Everything responded correctly, but Mason wasn't satisfied. We need to stress test it, he said. Ground run at full power. Watch for any anomalies. That's going to be loud. I don't care about loud. I care about safe. They fired up the engine. Mason brought the throttle to full power and held it there, rotors screaming, the entire aircraft shaking against the tie-downs. He watched hydraulic pressure, control response, bearing temperatures. 5 minutes. 10. 15. Everything held. Mason throttled back and shut down the engine. The sudden silence felt wrong. It's ready, he said. Derek was staring at him. You just did in 90 minutes what should have taken our team 2 days. I had practice. No, you had talent. Derek shook his head. Why the hell are you working as a janitor? It was the same question Vanessa had asked, the same question Chloe had asked, the same question Mason asked himself at 3 a.m. when he couldn't sleep. Because it's easier, Mason said quietly. Easier than what? Than remembering what I lost. Derek didn't push. They climbed out of the helicopter and found Vanessa waiting, arms crossed, expression unreadable. Well? She asked. It's ready, Mason said. You can run the test. You're sure? I'm sure. Vanessa studied him for a moment. Then she said, I want you in the cockpit. Mason's stomach dropped. What? For the test. I want you flying. No, Derek's the test pilot. I'm not. Derek's a good pilot. You're a better engineer. If something goes wrong, I need someone who can fix it in the air. That's not how this works. You can't just. This is my company, Mason, my demonstration, my risk, and I'm choosing you. Mason looked at Derek, expecting protest. Instead, Derek just shrugged. She's not wrong, Derek said. You know this bird better than anyone. If something happens, you'll spot it faster than I will. Mason turned back to Vanessa. I haven't flown in 3 years. I don't need you to fly. I need you to think. Derek can handle the controls. You watch the systems. It was insane, reckless. Everything Mason had spent 3 years trying to avoid, and he was going to do it anyway. Fine, he said. But if this goes wrong, it won't, Vanessa said with a certainty Mason didn't feel. At 11:30, the crowd reassembled. The general returned to his seat, looking skeptical but willing to give them another chance. Senator Calloway checked her watch impatiently. Mason climbed into the right seat of the helicopter, Derek in the left. The cockpit felt smaller than Mason remembered, more cramped, every surface a reminder of things he'd tried to forget. "You okay?" Derek asked. "No." "Good. Means you're paying attention." Derek ran through the pre-flight check. Mason watched the instruments, monitoring every system, looking for anything that might indicate a problem. Engine start, rotor engagement, systems online. Derek lifted off. Smooth and controlled, exactly like the first demonstration. The helicopter rose to hover height, stable and responsive. Then Derek's voice came through the headset, simulating hydraulic failure, shutting down backup pump. Mason's hands tightened on the armrests. He watched hydraulic pressure drop in the backup system, primary system taking full load. The aircraft shuddered slightly but held stable. "Control response good," Derek said. "Cyclic authority at 80%, collective holding steady." Mason watched the swash plate bearing temperatures. They were climbing, but within acceptable range. "Roll left," Mason said, 30 degrees. Derek complied. The aircraft rolled smoothly, corrected cleanly. "Now right, same angle." Again, smooth response. "Increase collective, maximum sustainable climb." The helicopter rose, engine working harder, putting stress on every system. Mason watched temperatures, pressures, control inputs. Everything held. "Level out," Mason said. "Maintain hover." Derek brought the aircraft back to stable hover on degraded systems, proving it could maintain control even with failure. The crowd was silent, watching, judging. "Forward flight," Mason said. 20 knots. Derek pushed the cyclic forward. The helicopter transitioned from hover to forward flight, handling the change in aerodynamic loading without issue. "Bring her home." Derek turned the aircraft back toward landing position. Mason watched the bearing temperatures start to drop as stress decreased. "Looking good," Derek said. "Ready to set down." But Mason was staring at the hydraulic pressure gauge. Something was wrong. "Wait," he said. "Primary pressure's dropping." "Say, what?" "No, it's..." Derek looked at his own gauge. "Damn, you're right. What's causing it?" Mason's mind raced through possibilities. "Leak? No, too gradual. Pump degradation? Maybe. But the temperature was normal." Then he saw it. A secondary indicator most pilots ignored. "The backup pump," Mason said. "We shut it down, but the control valve didn't close completely. It's creating a pressure leak between systems." "Can you fix it?" "Not from here. We need to land, now." "I'm on it." Derek began the landing sequence, but the pressure continued dropping. Control response degraded. The cyclic felt mushy. The helicopter started drifting right. "Losing authority," Derek said, voice tight. Mason reached for the backup pump control. "I'm restarting the backup system. It might stabilize pressure enough to land." "Do it." Mason flipped the switch. The backup pump engaged, pressure spiked, and for a second everything seemed fine. Then the aircraft yawed hard left. "What the hell?" Derek fought the controls. "I've got uncommanded yaw. Can't stop it." Mason's eyes scanned the instruments, pressure fluctuating, temperature rising in the tail rotor gearbox. The backup pump was trying to force pressure through a system that wasn't ready for it. "Shut down the backup pump," Mason said. "We'll lose all pressure." "We're about to lose tail rotor authority. Shut it down." Derek hit the switch. The backup pump died. Pressure dropped even further. The helicopter yawed again, but this time Derek caught it with pedal input. "I've got control," Derek said, "but barely." They were 20 feet off the ground, drifting, systems failing. The entire demonstration falling apart in front of 200 people who would remember this disaster for the rest of their careers. Mason stared at the instruments, trying to think. They couldn't stay airborne, couldn't hover. Had maybe 30 seconds before they lost control completely. "Derek, can you auto-rotate?" "Oh, on degraded hydraulics? That's suicide." "Can you do it?" Derek took a breath. "Maybe." "Then do it. Now."
Derek killed the engine.
The rotors stopped pulling power and started freewheeling, kept spinning by gravity alone. The helicopter began falling faster than Mason liked, but controlled. "Flare, Mason!" Mason shouted. Derek pulled back on the cyclic, trading forward speed for rotor energy. The helicopter's descent slowed. 10 feet, 5, 3. They hit hard. Not a crash, but not gentle. The landing gear compressed, absorbing impact, and the aircraft settled with a groan of stressed metal. Then silence. Mason looked at Derek. Derek looked at Mason. "We're alive," Derek said. "Yeah, that was the worst landing of my life."
Yeah.
They climbed out of the cockpit. The hangar was dead silent, everyone staring. Mason could feel the weight of their judgment, their disappointment, their certainty that Holt Aerotech had just failed in the most public way possible. Then the general started clapping. Slow, deliberate claps that echoed through the hangar. Senator Calloway joined in, then the executives, then everyone else, until the entire room was applauding. Mason stood there confused as Vanessa walked over. "What just happened?" Mason asked.
"You proved," Vanessa said quietly, "that even when everything goes wrong, this helicopter can still be flown. That's exactly what military contracts need."
The general approached, hand extended. "That was impressive, Mr. Reed. Most pilots would have panicked. You stayed calm and found a solution." "Derek did the flying," Mason said, shaking his hand. "I just watched instruments." "You did more than that. You diagnosed the problem mid-flight and made the call that saved both the aircraft and the demonstration." The general turned to Vanessa. "Ms. Hale, I'm recommending we move forward with contract negotiations. Your helicopter performed exactly as promised, and your team showed me they can handle emergencies. That's what matters." Vanessa's face remained carefully neutral, but Mason saw relief flash through her eyes. "Thank you, General. We look forward to working with you." After the general left, after the crowd dispersed, after the excitement faded into exhausted relief, Mason found himself standing alone next to the helicopter, staring at the machine that had just changed everything. "You did it," Vanessa said, appearing beside him. "We got lucky." "No, you were prepared. There's a difference." Mason didn't respond. He was thinking about Chloe, about the promise he'd made to himself 3 years ago to never do this again, and about how good it had felt to be useful. "I want to offer you a job," Vanessa said. "Chief Flight Systems Engineer. Full benefits. Salary 3 times what you were making as a janitor." "No, Mason." "I said no. This was one demonstration. That's it. Tomorrow I go back to my regular life." "Why? You just proved you're one of the best engineers in this building. Why would you waste that?" "Because," Mason said quietly, "being the best engineer didn't save my wife. Didn't stop her from dying while I was on the other side of the world building helicopters for people I never met. And I swore I'd never let my work matter more than my daughter again." Vanessa was quiet for a long moment. Then she said, "Your wife wouldn't want you to stop living. You didn't know her, and no. But I know what it looks like when someone's using grief as an excuse to hide from the world. And Mason, you've been hiding for 3 years." The words stung because they were true. Mason had been hiding. From pain, from risk, from everything that made life worth living except the one thing he had left. "I need to pick up Chloe," he said, not looking at Vanessa. "We're done here." He started walking toward the exit. Behind him, he heard Vanessa call out, "The offer stands. When you're ready, it's yours." Mason didn't respond. He just kept walking, out of the hangar, across the parking lot, into his truck that barely started and smelled like failure. He drove to Chloe's school and found her waiting on the front steps, backpack beside her, working on something in a notebook. She looked up when he pulled in and ran to the truck, climbing in with the kind of energy only 7-year-olds possessed. "Dad, how was the demonstration?" "It was fine." "Just fine. We had some problems, but we fixed them." Chloe studied his face. "You look sad." "I'm not sad, just tired." "Did you fly the helicopter?" Mason glanced at her, surprised. "How did you know?" "Mrs. Chen texted me. She said her husband works at the airport, and he heard the helicopter almost crashed, but someone smart saved it. I figured that was you." Mason couldn't help smiling. "Yeah, that was me. See, I told you that you should go."
Chloe buckled her seatbelt. Are you going to keep fixing helicopters? I don't know, baby. Why not? Because it's complicated. Chloe sighed. Grown-ups always say things are complicated when they're just scared. Mason looked at his daughter, 7 years old, impossibly wise, holding up a mirror he didn't want to look into. Maybe you're right, he said quietly. They drove home in comfortable silence. That evening, Mason made dinner and helped Chloe with homework and read her a story before bed. Normal things, safe things, the kind of routine that kept the world manageable. But as he turned off her bedroom light, Chloe said something that stayed with him long after she fell asleep. Mom would be proud of you today, Dad. I'm proud of you too. Mason stood in the doorway, watching his daughter sleep, feeling the weight of choices he hadn't made yet pressing down on him like gravity. Downstairs, his phone buzzed. A message from Vanessa. Thank you for everything. The offer's real. Think about it. Mason stared at the message for a long time. Then he set the phone down and went to bed without responding. But he did think about it. All night. Lying in the dark, remembering what it felt like to solve problems that mattered, to use skills he'd thought were dead, to be something more than invisible. By morning, he still didn't have an answer. But for the first time in 3 years, he wanted one. Mason showed up to work the next morning in his gray uniform, mop in hand, ready to pretend the demonstration had never happened. The north wing needed cleaning. Someone had spilled coffee in the break room. The bathrooms required their weekly deep scrub. Normal work. Invisible work. The kind that let him disappear into routine and stop thinking about helicopters or job offers, or the way Vanessa had looked at him when she'd said he'd been hiding for 3 years. He made it until 10:30 before Carol from HR found him. Mason, Ms. Hale wants to see you in her office. Mason kept mopping. I'm working. She said it's important. I'm sure it can wait. Carol shifted uncomfortably. She said if you refused, I should tell you it's about your daughter's school. Mason's hands tightened on the mop handle. What about her school? I don't know. She just said you'd want to hear it. He abandoned the mop in the hallway and followed Carol to the executive elevator. The ride up felt longer than it should have, the silence broken only by corporate elevator music that made Mason want to break something. Vanessa's office occupied the entire top floor. Floor-to-ceiling windows overlooked the airfield, where helicopters sat in neat rows like students waiting for instruction. Her desk was organized chaos. Blueprints, contract documents, coffee cups at various stages of abandonment. She was on the phone when Mason walked in, pacing near the windows, her voice sharp and controlled in that way people used when they were losing an argument but refusing to admit it. I understand your concerns, Richard, but the demonstration was a success. General Madison is moving forward with negotiations. A pause. Yes, there were complications. That's why it's called a test. Another pause, longer this time. I'll present the full report at the board meeting. Yes, fine, goodbye. She hung up and turned to face Mason. She looked tired, more tired than yesterday, like she'd spent the night fighting battles he couldn't see. You wanted to talk about Chloe's school, Mason said. No. Carol lied. I told her to say whatever would get you up here. Mason's jaw tightened. That's a terrible thing to lie about. I know. I'm sorry. Vanessa didn't sound sorry. She sounded desperate. But you've been avoiding me. I've been working. You've been hiding. That seems to be your favorite word lately. Vanessa walked to her desk and picked up a folder. I had someone pull your military records. Want to know what I found? No. She opened the folder anyway. 6 years of exemplary service, 3 commendations for innovation in aircraft maintenance under combat conditions, a Bronze Star for recovering a downed helicopter while under fire. She looked up. You didn't just build helicopters, Mason. You risked your life to save the people flying them. Ancient history. Is it? Because yesterday you risked your life again. You could have refused to get in that cockpit, could have let Derek handle the emergency alone, but you didn't. That was different. How? Mason didn't have a good answer. Or maybe he did, and he just didn't want to say it out loud. Vanessa set the folder down. The board wants to terminate your employment. The words hit like a punch. What? Why? Because you're a liability. A janitor who knows more about our aircraft than our engineers, who commandeered a $70 million prototype, who contradicted our lead engineer in front of military brass.
She smiled without humor. They think you make us look incompetent. So, fire me. I don't want to fire you. I want to promote you. We already had this conversation. No, we had half a conversation before you ran away. This time, I need you to listen. Vanessa walked around the desk until she was standing directly in front of him, close enough that Mason could see the exhaustion in her eyes, the tension in her shoulders, the weight she carried that had nothing to do with helicopters. The contract we just secured is worth $300 million, she said quietly. We're building 36 aircraft over the next 4 years, and I need someone I trust overseeing quality control, someone who cares more about the helicopter working than about corporate politics or career advancement. Derek is brilliant, but he's also ambitious. He wants my job someday, and that means he makes decisions based on what looks good, not what's right. Vanessa held his gaze. You make decisions based on what's right, even when it costs you. That's the person I need. I have a daughter. I know. That's why the position comes with flexible hours. You can work from home 2 days a week. Leave at 3 to pick up Chloe. Bring her here after school if you need to. I don't care about FaceTime, Mason. I care about results. It was a good offer, more than good, the kind of offer that would change everything for him and Chloe. Better salary, better hours, work that actually mattered. And all it required was admitting that the last 3 years had been a waste. I need time, Mason said. You've had 3 years. I need more time. Vanessa studied him for a long moment. Then she walked back to her desk and pulled out a badge. Not gray like the custodial staff wore, but blue, engineering department. This is yours if you want it, she said. The position starts Monday. If you're not here, I'll assume that's your answer. She held out the badge. Mason stared at it like it might explode. Take it, Vanessa said. Even if you're not sure, take it and think about what you want instead of what you're afraid of. Mason took the badge. It felt heavier than it should have. 1 week? He said. I'll give you an answer in 1 week. Monday or nothing? Those are the terms. That's not fair. No, Vanessa said. It's not. But nothing about this is fair. Not for you, not for me, not for the 1,600 people whose jobs depend on us not screwing this up. She sat down at her desk, suddenly looking even more exhausted. I'm asking you to trust me, Mason. I know you don't have any reason to, but I'm asking anyway. Mason looked at the badge in his hand, then at Vanessa. For the first time since he'd met her, she wasn't trying to control him or manipulate him or force him into anything. She was just asking, honestly, the way people did when they needed help and had run out of options. I'll think about it, he said. That's all I'm asking. Mason left the office, badge in his pocket, feeling like he'd just agreed to something he didn't fully understand. The elevator ride down felt shorter than the ride up. Or maybe time just moved differently when you were falling. He spent the rest of the day cleaning, trying not to think about the badge burning a hole in his pocket. But every time he emptied a trash can or mopped a floor, his mind drifted back to the helicopter, to the problem solving, to the feeling of being useful in a way that mattered. By the time he picked up Chloe from school, Mason still hadn't made a decision. They drove home in silence, Chloe chattering about a robotics project while Mason pretended to listen and failed. Dad, are you okay? Chloe asked finally. Yeah, baby, just thinking. About the helicopter job? Mason glanced at her. How do you know about that? I'm 7, not stupid. I know when something's bothering you. She paused. Are you going to take it? I don't know. What would Mom say? The question stopped him cold. Mason pulled the truck into their driveway and sat there, engine running, hands on the wheel. I don't know what Mom would say, he admitted. She wanted me to be happy, but she also wanted me to be there for you. You can do both. Can I? Chloe unbuckled her seatbelt and leaned over to hug him. Dad, you're always there for me, even when you're sad, even when you're tired, even when you think you're not enough. She pulled back and looked at him with Sarah's eyes. But I don't want you to be just my dad. I want you to be happy too. Mason felt something crack in his chest. When did you get so smart? I've always been smart. You just stopped noticing. She climbed out of the truck and headed inside, leaving Mason sitting alone with a question that felt heavier than it should have. That evening, after dinner and homework and all the normal rituals that made up their life, Mason sat on the back porch and stared at his phone. Vanessa's message was still there, unanswered. The badge sat on the table beside him, reflecting streetlight. He thought about Sarah, about the last conversation they'd had before she got too sick to talk. She'd been in the hospital bed, weak and hollow, but still trying to smile for him. "Promise me something," she'd said. "Anything." Promise me you'll keep living after I'm gone. Not just surviving, actually living. I promise. He'd broken that promise. Had spent 3 years surviving but not living, existing but not being present, going through motions without meaning. And maybe it was time to stop. Mason picked up his phone and typed a message to Vanessa. "I'll be there Monday, but I need one condition." Her response came back almost immediately. "What condition? If this doesn't work, if I can't balance the job in Chloe, I walk away. No guilt, no pressure, no trying to convince me to stay." A longer pause this time. Then, "Agreed. See you Monday." Mason set the phone down and picked up the badge. In the dim light, it looked like possibility. Or maybe just another way to fail. He wouldn't know until Monday. The weekend passed too quickly. Saturday, Mason took Chloe to the robotics competition across town. She won 3rd place with her sorting robot, beating kids twice her age, and Mason felt pride so sharp it hurt. Sunday they went to the park. Normal things. Father-daughter things. Building memories that had nothing to do with work or helicopters or choices that kept him awake at night. But Sunday evening, after Chloe went to bed, Mason stood in his closet staring at clothes he hadn't worn in 3 years. Button-down shirts, khaki pants, the civilian uniform of engineers who worked in offices instead of workshops. He picked out something that fit, more or less, and laid it on the chair for morning. Then he lay in bed, staring at the ceiling, wondering if he was making the biggest mistake of his life or finally fixing one. Monday morning came too fast. Mason got Chloe ready for school, made breakfast, packed lunches, went through all the routines that kept their world stable. At the door, Chloe hugged him extra tight. "Good luck, Dad." "Thanks, baby. You're going to be great." "How do you know?" "Because you're always great. You just forget sometimes." Mason drove her to school, then sat in the parking lot for 10 minutes, hands on the wheel, the blue badge on the dashboard. He could still turn around, could go back to being invisible, could keep surviving instead of living. But Chloe's words echoed in his head, and Sarah's, and even Vanessa's, though he hated admitting she might be right about anything. At 8:15, Mason put the truck in gear and drove to Holt Aerotech. The parking lot looked different from this side of the decision. Not threatening exactly, but significant. Like crossing a threshold he couldn't uncross. He parked and walked to the main entrance. The guard saw his new badge and waved him through without question. The elevator took him not to the basement custodial office, but to the 3rd-floor engineering department. Derek met him at the entrance. "Reed, Vanessa said you were starting today." "Yeah." "Your office is this way." Office. Mason had an office. The word felt foreign. Derek led him down a hallway lined with workstations where engineers hunched over computers, analyzing data, arguing about specifications. They looked up as Mason passed, some curious, some resentful, all wondering who this janitor-turned-engineer thought he was. The office was small, one window overlooking the airfield, a desk with a computer that looked newer than his truck, a bookshelf waiting to be filled. "Conference room meeting in 20 minutes, Derek said. "We're finalizing the production schedule for the military contract. Vanessa wants you there." "I just started. I don't know anything about the production schedule." "Then listen and learn." Derek started to leave, then stopped. "Reed, I'm going to be honest with you. Half the engineering team thinks your promotion is political bullshit. They think Vanessa's rewarding you for drama instead of credentials. What do you think?" Derek considered the question. "I think you saved the demonstration. I think you know helicopters better than most people with engineering degrees, but I also think you're going to have to prove yourself every single day. Because the second you make a mistake, people will use it as evidence that you don't belong here. Thanks for the pep talk. I'm not trying to discourage you. I'm trying to prepare you. This job is going to be harder than anything you did in the military. Derek paused. But if you can handle it, you'll be one of the best engineers in this building. Maybe the best. He left Mason alone in the office. Mason sat down at the desk and stared at the computer, at the window, at the life he'd somehow stumbled back into. His phone buzzed, a text from Vanessa. Welcome to the team. Don't screw up. VH. Mason almost smiled. At least she was honest. The conference room meeting was exactly as painful as Mason expected. 12 engineers, all with opinions, all talking over each other about production timelines and supply chains and quality control metrics. Mason sat in the back and tried to follow conversations that moved too fast and used too much jargon. Vanessa sat at the head of the table, listening more than talking, occasionally steering the discussion when it veered off course. She didn't acknowledge Mason's presence, didn't introduce him, didn't do anything to make his arrival significant, which Mason appreciated. The last thing he needed was more attention. Halfway through the meeting, someone pulled up a schematic of the swash plate assembly. The same assembly Mason had rebuilt before the demonstration. We're having supplier issues with the bearings, an engineer named Patricia said. Lead times pushed to 8 weeks. That puts the first delivery behind schedule. Can we source from a different supplier? Derek asked. Not without recertification. That adds another 6 weeks minimum. The room fell silent. Everyone staring at the schematic like it might offer solutions it didn't have. Mason raised his hand, felt immediately stupid, like he was back in grade school. But Vanessa saw him and nodded. You have something, Mason. The bearings don't need to be custom if we adjust the mounting tolerances. Standard aerospace bearings would work fine with minor modifications to the housing. Patricia frowned. We tested standard bearings. They failed stress requirements. You tested them in the original housing configuration. But if you increase the contact surface area by 0.3 millimeters and add a secondary retention ring, standard bearings can handle the load. I did it on field repairs in Afghanistan when we couldn't get parts delivered. The room went quiet again. Different kind of quiet. Not thoughtful silence, but skeptical silence. That would require redesigning the housing, Patricia said. Engineering analysis, stress testing, documentation. That's months of work. Or, Mason said carefully, I could draft the modifications this week, and we could test a prototype by next Monday. Derek leaned forward. You can draft full engineering modifications in a week? If nobody interrupts me, yeah. Vanessa looked at Patricia. How long would it take your team? Patricia's face tightened. 6 weeks minimum, but we do it properly. Full analysis, documentation, peer review. Mason, Vanessa said, if I give you this assignment, can you deliver? Yes. No qualifications? No. Vanessa nodded. Then it's yours. Draft the modifications. Derek, coordinate testing resources. I want a prototype ready by next Monday. She looked around the table. Anyone have a problem with that? Nobody spoke. But Mason could feel the resentment radiating from half the room. The meeting ended. Engineers filed out, some glancing at Mason with curiosity, others with barely concealed hostility. Patricia stopped next to his chair. You just made yourself a lot of enemies, she said quietly. I'm trying to solve a problem. You're trying to prove you belong here. There's a difference. She walked away before Mason could respond. Derek stayed behind. She's not wrong. You need to be careful. I'm just doing the job Vanessa hired me for. No, you're doing the job faster and better than people who've been here 10 years. That makes you a threat. Derek picked up his tablet. I'm not saying don't do it. I'm saying watch your back, because not everyone wants you to succeed. Mason spent the rest of the day in his office, getting familiar with design software he hadn't used in years, reviewing specifications, building a plan for modifications that would work or get him fired. At 3 o'clock, his alarm went off. Time to pick up Chloe. He saved his work and headed for the parking lot. In the elevator, he ran into Vanessa. Leaving early? She asked. Picking up my daughter, like we agreed. I know. I'm just surprised you're actually doing it. Most new hires try to prove themselves by working late. I'm not most new hires. No,
Vanessa said. You're not.
The elevator reached the ground floor. They walked out together, and Vanessa surprised him by following him to the parking lot. "How was your first day?" she asked. "I made enemies, volunteered for an impossible deadline, and left early. So about average, I guess." Vanessa smiled. Actually smiled, not the corporate smile she used in meetings. "You're going to be fine, Mason." "How do you know?" "Because you don't care what people think about you. You only care about the work. That's exactly what this company needs." She walked toward her own car, a black sedan that probably cost more than Mason's house, and Mason stood there for a moment, trying to figure out what had just happened. Then his phone buzzed. Text from Mrs. Chen reminding him Chloe had robotics club until 4. Mason got in his truck and drove to the school. Found Chloe in the workshop, surrounded by other kids, teaching them how to calibrate sensors. She looked up when he walked in, face lighting up. "Dad, you came!" "Of course I came. How was your first day?" "Complicated. How was yours?" "I taught 3 kids how to code. It was awesome." They drove home, Chloe talking about robotics while Mason half listened, his mind still on bearing modifications and hostile engineers, and Vanessa's unexpected smile. That evening, after dinner, Mason opened his laptop and started working on the swash plate redesign. The work came easier than he expected. Muscle memory and 3 years of suppressed knowledge combining into something that felt almost like the person he used to be. By midnight, he had a preliminary design. Not perfect, but close. Closer than he'd thought possible. He sent the files to Derek with a note. "First draft. Review, and let me know what I missed." Derek's response came back 5 minutes later. "How the hell did you do this so fast?" Mason didn't answer. He just closed the laptop and went to bed. The rest of the week followed the same pattern. Work, pick up Chloe, dinner. More work after she went to bed. Refining designs, running stress calculations, preparing documentation that met corporate standards while solving problems nobody else could figure out. By Friday afternoon, Mason had a complete modification package ready for testing. He sent it to Derek and waited for feedback. Derek called him 10 minutes later. "This is good, Reed, really good. But Patricia's team spent 3 hours trying to find flaws and couldn't, which means they're even more pissed at you than before." "I can live with that." "Can you?" "Because I'm hearing rumors. People saying you're getting special treatment because Vanessa likes you, that you're not qualified for this position. Are they wrong?" "About the qualifications?" "Yes." "About Vanessa?" "I don't know. Are they?" Mason didn't answer. Derek sighed. "Look, I don't care who Vanessa likes or doesn't like. I care about the work, and your work is solid. But you need to be aware that people are watching. Every mistake you make will be amplified. Every success will be dismissed as luck or favoritism. That's the reality of this situation. Thanks for the warning. I'm serious, Mason. Be careful." Tut. Mason hung up and stared at his office window. Outside, helicopters sat on the airfield, waiting for pilots who trusted the engineers who built them. That trust was earned, not given, not assumed, and Mason was going to have to earn it every single day. His phone buzzed. Text from Vanessa. "Heard the modifications are ready for testing. Good work. Drinks tonight to celebrate?" Mason stared at the message. It was professional. Probably. Just a boss congratulating an employee. Nothing more. Except something about it felt different. Less corporate, more personal. He typed back, "Can't. Have to pick up Chloe. Bring her. There's a place near the school with good burgers. My treat." Mason hesitated. This felt like crossing a line he wasn't sure existed. But Vanessa had kept every promise she'd made, had given him flexible hours, had trusted him with real work. Maybe dinner wasn't crossing a line. Maybe it was just dinner. Okay. Where? She sent him an address. Mason picked up Chloe from school and drove to a diner that looked like it had been there since the 50s. Vanessa was already inside, sitting in a booth near the window, looking less like a CEO and more like someone who was tired of being in charge. Chloe's eyes went wide. "Is that your boss?" "Yeah, she's pretty." "Don't make this weird, baby." "I'm 7. Everything's weird." They slid into the booth across from Vanessa. Chloe stared at her with the open curiosity only children could get away with. "You're the one who fixed the lights at my school," Chloe said. Vanessa smiled. I am. Did it help? I won third place in the robotics competition, so yeah, it helped. Third place is impressive. I would have gotten first, but my sorting algorithm had a bug I didn't catch until the demo. Next time, I'll get first. I believe you. They ordered food, burgers for Mason and Chloe, a salad for Vanessa that she picked at without enthusiasm. The conversation stayed light, Chloe talking about robotics, Vanessa asking questions that sounded genuinely interested. Mason watched them interact and felt something strange in his chest. Not discomfort exactly, but awareness. Awareness that his daughter was talking to someone who wasn't Mrs. Chen, or a teacher, or another kid's parent. Someone from his work life bleeding into his home life in a way that hadn't happened since Sarah died. After dinner, Chloe excused herself to the bathroom. Vanessa looked at Mason across the table. "She's incredible," Vanessa said. "You must be proud." "Every day. Sarah would be proud too, of both of you." The mention of Sarah should have hurt, usually did. But somehow, coming from Vanessa, it just felt honest. "I don't know if I'm doing this right," Mason admitted. "The job, raising Chloe, any of it. Most days, I feel like I'm barely holding things together." "Welcome to being human. Nobody knows what they're doing. We're all just pretending and hoping nobody notices." "You don't seem like you're pretending." Vanessa laughed, bitter and sharp. "Mason, I spent today in a board meeting where 3 men in suits told me I'm too emotional to run a company, that promoting you was evidence of poor judgment, that if the military contract fails, they'll vote me out and install someone who actually knows what they're doing." She picked at her salad. "So yeah, I'm pretending. Really convincingly, apparently. Why do you keep fighting them?" "Because giving up means letting them win, and I'm too stubborn to do that." Chloe came back, sliding into the booth beside Mason. "Can we get dessert?" "We should probably get home," Mason said. "But I want ice cream." "Chloe, ice cream sounds perfect," Vanessa said. "My treat. What do you want?" Chloe grinned. "Chocolate, with sprinkles." "Gishbam." Basi. They ordered dessert, watched Chloe demolish a sundae that was bigger than her head, and for half an hour, Mason forgot about hostile engineers and impossible deadlines and all the ways this new life could fall apart. He just sat in a diner with his daughter and his boss, who maybe wasn't just his boss anymore, eating ice cream and feeling something that might have been happiness. Later, driving home, Chloe said, "I like her." "Who?" "Your boss, Vanessa. She's nice." "She's more than nice, Dad. She looks at you like you're important. I work for her. I'm supposed to be important. Not work important, different important." Mason glanced at his daughter. "What are you talking about?" "Nothing." Chloe smiled out the window. "Just noticing things." That night, after Chloe went to bed, Mason sat on the back porch and stared at his phone. He should text Vanessa, thank her for dinner, keep things professional. Instead, he texted, "Chloe had a good time. Thanks for including her." Vanessa's response came back immediately. "So did I." "Your daughter's special, Mason. You're raising her right." Mason stared at the message, trying to figure out what he was feeling. Gratitude? Relief? Something else he wasn't ready to name? He set the phone down without responding and went to bed. But sleep didn't come easy. His mind kept circling back to the diner, to the way Vanessa had talked to Chloe like she mattered, to the unexpected comfort of not being alone. Monday came. The swash plate modifications went to testing. The prototype performed exactly as Mason predicted. Better than predicted, actually, handling stress loads 10% higher than the original design. Patricia's team verified the results. Reluctantly. Thoroughly. Looking for any excuse to declare the modifications insufficient. They found nothing. Tuesday afternoon, Derek called Mason into his office. "The modifications are approved for production," Derek said. "You just saved us 6 weeks and $500,000. Vanessa's recommending you for a promotion." "I've been here 2 weeks." "Yeah, people are going to love that." Mason didn't care about promotions. Didn't care about corporate politics or what people thought about his rapid advancement. He cared that the bearings would work, that pilots would trust the aircraft, that the job he'd promised Sarah he'd keep doing actually mattered. That evening, Vanessa called him. "Can you come to my office? There's something I want to show you." Mason found her on the roof of the building, standing near the edge, looking out at the airfield where helicopters lined up like promises waiting to be kept. "What am I looking at?" Mason asked. Vanessa pointed to the far end of the runway. "That helicopter, the one you fixed, it's being prepped for the first military delivery, 35 more coming after it. All because you found a piece of metal nobody else noticed." "That wasn't just me." "Yes, it was. You saw what everyone else missed. You fixed what everyone else said was unfixable. You made this happen." She turned to face him. "I wanted you to see it. Wanted you to remember why you came back." Mason looked at the helicopter in the distance, at the aircraft he'd rebuilt with his own hands, and felt something settle in his chest. This was why. Not for the salary or the title or the corporate bullshit. For this. For building things that worked. For solving problems that mattered. For remembering who he used to be before grief convinced him that person was gone forever. "Thank you," Mason said quietly. "For what?" "For not letting me quit." Vanessa smiled. "You're welcome. Now get out of here. Your daughter's waiting." Mason left the roof and drove home, feeling lighter than he had in 3 years. Maybe Chloe was right. Maybe happiness wasn't something you had to choose between. Maybe you could be a good father and a good engineer. Maybe you could survive grief without abandoning the things that made you who you were. Maybe, Mason thought, it was finally time to stop hiding and start living again. 3 months later, Mason stood in the hangar watching the 16th helicopter roll off the production line, and he still couldn't quite believe this was his life now. Chief Quality Control Engineer. The title felt too big, like wearing someone else's jacket, but the work felt right. Checking tolerances, reviewing assembly procedures, making sure every aircraft that left Holt Aerotech was something a pilot could trust with their life. The kind of work that mattered. Chloe had adjusted better than he expected. She did homework in his office some afternoons, building robots on his desk while he reviewed specifications. Mrs. Chen still watched her 2 days a week, but the rest of the time, Chloe was part of his world in a way that felt natural instead of forced. And Vanessa. Mason didn't know what to call what was happening with Vanessa. They had dinner sometimes. Not often. Maybe once every 2 weeks. Always casual. Always with Chloe. Burgers at the diner or pizza at the place near Chloe's school. Conversations that stayed professional except when they didn't. When Vanessa would say something honest about her father or the board or the loneliness of being in charge, and Mason would recognize the same isolation he'd felt for 3 years. It wasn't dating, wasn't friendship exactly, wasn't anything he could name, but it was something. "Reed, you got a minute?" Mason turned. Derek stood near the helicopter, holding a tablet, wearing the expression people used when they had bad news and didn't want to deliver it. "What's wrong?" Mason asked. "Military's requesting modifications to the tail rotor assembly. They want increased performance in high-altitude operations." Derek pulled up a schematic. Means redesigning the gearbox. Engineering's estimating 6 months. 6 months puts us behind delivery schedule. Yeah, Vanessa's meeting with the board tomorrow to discuss options. Mason studied the schematic. The gearbox was complex. Dozens of interlocking components, each one critical to the system's performance. Redesigning it properly would take months. Rushing it would create failures that could kill people. But there was another option, riskier, faster. "What if we don't redesign the gearbox?" Mason said. Derek frowned. The specs require increased performance. They don't specify how we achieve it. What if we modify the blade pitch instead? Increase the angle of attack at high altitude, compensate with the existing gearbox. That would require recalibrating the entire rotor system. 2 weeks of work, maybe 3. Derek stared at him. Or it fails spectacularly and we lose the contract. It won't fail. How do you know? Because I've done it before. Field modification in Afghanistan when we needed high-altitude performance and couldn't wait for parts. Mason pointed at the schematic. The principle's the same. Increase lift efficiency, manage the torque load, verify stress limits. It works. Derek was quiet for a long moment. Then he said, "You need to pitch this to Vanessa. If she approves, I'll support it. But this is your idea, Reed, which means if it fails, it's your fault." "I know. That evening, Mason found Vanessa still in her office at 8 o'clock, surrounded by reports and half-empty coffee cups. She looked up when he knocked, and he saw exhaustion so deep it made him want to tell her to go home and sleep for a week. "Mason, what are you still doing here?" "I have an idea about the tail rotor problem." "Does it involve telling the military to accept what we already built?" "Vamos echite communicate." "No. It involves making what we built better without spending 6 months doing it." Vanessa sat back. "I'm listening." Mason explained the blade pitch modification. Vanessa listened without interrupting, her expression shifting from skepticism to interest to something that looked like cautious hope. "This would really only take 3 weeks?" she asked. "If nothing goes wrong, yeah," she shot "And if something does go wrong?" "Then we lose time we don't have, and probably the contract with it." Vanessa stood and walked to the window. Outside, the airfield was dark except for runway lights and the distant glow of the hangar where Mason's 16th helicopter sat waiting for delivery. "The board meeting's tomorrow," Vanessa said quietly. "They're already questioning my judgment, questioning the contract, questioning whether I'm capable of running this company." She turned back to face him. "If I approve this and it fails, they'll have all the evidence they need to remove me. Then don't approve it. Tell the military we need 6 months. Negotiate an extension." "They won't extend. Defense contracts don't work that way. Either we deliver on time or they find another supplier." She walked back to her desk and sat down heavily. "I'm trapped, Mason. Every option is wrong." Mason understood that feeling. Had lived with it for 3 years after Sarah died, trapped between the person he used to be and the person grief had turned him into, unable to move forward or back. "What would your father do?" Mason asked. Vanessa laughed without humor. "My father would have hired better engineers, so this problem never happened. My father would have built relationships with the military, so they trusted him enough to accept delays. My father—" She stopped. "My father wouldn't have needed a janitor to save his company." "I wasn't a janitor. I was an engineer who was hiding. What's the difference?" "Oh, intent. I chose to hide. You didn't choose to need help. There's no shame in that." Vanessa looked at him, and Mason saw something shift in her expression. Not hope exactly, but recognition. The same recognition he'd felt that first night in the diner when she'd admitted she didn't know what she was doing either. "If I approve this modification," Vanessa said slowly, "and it fails, I lose everything. The company, my family's legacy, any chance of proving I deserve this position. If you don't approve it, you lose everything anyway. At least this way you're fighting. Fighting and winning are different things. Yeah, but you don't get to win without fighting first." Vanessa was quiet for a long time. Then she opened her laptop and started typing. "Draft me a formal proposal," she said. "Full technical specifications, risk analysis, testing protocol. I want it on my desk by tomorrow morning." "You're approving it?" "Battery bomb. What? I'm giving you a chance to convince me I should. Don't waste it." Mason worked through the night, drafting proposals, running calculations, building a case for why his modification would work when the safe option was to admit defeat and negotiate delays that would never come. By 6 in the morning, he had a document that was either brilliant or career-ending suicide. He sent it to Vanessa and went home to shower and pretend he'd slept. Chloe was awake when he got there, eating cereal at the kitchen table, still in her pajamas. "You look terrible, Dad. Didn't sleep." "Big project?" "Something like that." Chloe studied him with Sarah's eyes. "Is everything okay?" Mason poured coffee he didn't want and sat down across from her. "I don't know, baby. I made a recommendation at work that could either fix a big problem or make everything worse. And now I have to wait and see which one it is. Do you think it'll work?" "Yeah." "Then it probably will. You're usually right about helicopter stuff. Usually isn't always." "No, but it's better than never." Chloe finished her cereal. "Mom used to say you were too careful sometimes, that you were so afraid of making mistakes that you wouldn't try things that might be amazing." Mason's chest tightened. When did she say that? Isha ko ban. Lots of times. When you were deployed and she'd video call you and you'd tell her about problems you couldn't solve because the right answer was too risky. Chloe stood and put her bowl in the sink. She said being brave didn't mean not being scared. It meant doing the scary thing anyway because it mattered. She hugged him and went upstairs to get ready for school, leaving Mason sitting alone in the kitchen with memories of a woman who'd understood him better than he'd ever understood himself. Sarah had been right. He was too careful. Had spent 3 years being so afraid of losing what he had left that he'd stopped trying to build anything new. But maybe it was time to stop being careful and start being brave. At 9 o'clock, Vanessa called. The board approved your proposal. Barely. We have 3 weeks to make this work. We'll make it work. Mason, if this fails, it won't fail. How can you be so sure? Because I'm not careful anymore. I'm brave. There's a difference. Vanessa was quiet. Then she laughed, genuine and surprised. Where did that come from? My daughter. She's smarter than both of us. I believe you. Get to work, Reed. Clock's ticking in. Mason assembled a team. Derek, 2 senior engineers, and a machinist named Tony, who'd been building helicopter parts since before Mason was born. They worked 16-hour days, machining new rotor blades, recalibrating control systems, testing and retesting until everything was perfect. Chloe spent more time with Mrs. Chen, more time doing homework alone, more time being understanding when Mason came home exhausted and barely coherent. I'm sorry, baby, Mason said one night after missing her robotics competition because of testing delays. This won't last forever. I know, Dad. You're fixing something important. Mom would understand. I understand, too. But Mason saw the disappointment in her eyes, and he hated himself for putting work before her again. Hated that he was repeating the same mistakes that had cost him time with Sarah he could never get back. On day 18, they mounted the modified rotor on a test aircraft. Derek climbed into the pilot seat. Mason stood in the hangar, watching instruments, praying he hadn't miscalculated something that would get Derek killed. The helicopter lifted off, climbed to altitude. Derek pushed the aircraft through aggressive maneuvers, testing performance limits, stress-loading every component. Everything held. They ran the test 3 more times over the next 2 days. High altitude, low altitude, maximum power, emergency procedures, every test successful. On day 21, they delivered the modification package to the military. General Madison flew the aircraft himself, pushing it harder than Derek had, looking for any excuse to reject the design and find a different supplier. He landed after 30 minutes and climbed out of the cockpit with an expression Mason couldn't read. Well? Vanessa asked. The general smiled. Ms. Hale, you just made the best helicopter in the U.S. military inventory even better. I'm authorizing full production implementation. Whatever you're paying your engineering team, it's not enough. Vanessa shook his hand. Professional, controlled, showing no emotion. But when the general left, she turned to Mason and Derek and let out a breath that sounded like she'd been holding it for 3 weeks. We did it, she said quietly. You did it, Derek corrected. You trusted Reed when everyone said you shouldn't. That took guts, Vanessa. Or stupidity. I'm still not sure which. Does it matter? Mason asked. We won. Vanessa looked at him, and Mason saw something in her expression he'd never seen before. Not relief, not gratitude, something deeper. Something that made his stomach flip in a way that had nothing to do with helicopters. No, Vanessa said. I guess it doesn't matter. That evening, Vanessa insisted on buying dinner for the entire team. They went to the diner, the same one where she'd first met Chloe, and crowded into the largest booth, eating burgers and celebrating a victory that had felt impossible 3 weeks ago. Chloe came too, sitting beside Mason, stealing French fries from his plate, asking Derek technical questions about rotor dynamics that made the senior engineer laugh and answer seriously like she was a colleague instead of a 7-year-old. Watching his daughter interact with his coworkers, watching them treat her like she belonged there, Mason felt something shift. This wasn't just his work life bleeding into his home life anymore. It was integration. 2 parts of himself that he'd kept separate for 3 years finally occupying the same space without conflict. After dinner, after the team dispersed, Vanessa walked Mason and Chloe to the parking lot. Thank you, Vanessa said, for believing this would work when I wasn't sure I did. You would have figured it out eventually. Maybe, but you made it happen now.
That matters. Well, Chloe tugged on Mason's sleeve. Dad, can I wait in the truck? I want to finish my book. Yeah, baby. I'll be there in a minute. Chloe ran to the truck,
leaving Mason alone with Vanessa under parking lot lights that made everything feel more significant than it should have. She's wonderful, Vanessa said. You're raising her right. I'm trying. Most days I feel like I'm failing. You're not failing. You're present. You're trying. That's more than a lot of parents manage. Vanessa was quiet for a moment. Then she said, Can I ask you something personal? Okay. When you look at me, what do you see? The question surprised him. Mason had expected something about work or the contract or the next project. Not this. I see someone who's fighting, Mason said honestly. Someone who refuses to quit even when quitting would be easier. Someone who's lonely but won't admit it because admitting weakness feels like failure. Vanessa's breath caught. That's more honest than I expected. You asked. I did. She looked away. I see the same things in you, you know. Someone fighting, someone lonely, someone who built walls so high they forgot what it felt like to let people in. I let people in. You let Chloe in. Everyone else you keep at arm's length, including me. Mason didn't know what to say to that. Didn't know how to explain that letting people in meant risking loss, and he'd already lost more than he could survive losing again. I'm not trying to push you, Vanessa said quickly. I just wanted you to know that I see you, not the engineer, not the employee. You, the person who's trying to figure out how to be whole again after grief broke everything. She started walking toward her car, and Mason stood there watching her go, feeling something crack in the walls he'd spent 3 years building. Vanessa, he called. She stopped, turned around. I see you too, Mason said, and you're not as alone as you think you are. Vanessa smiled, small and sad and real. Neither are you, Mason. Yeah. She got in her car and drove away, leaving Mason standing in the parking lot with the uncomfortable realization that somewhere along the way, his boss had become more than his boss. And he didn't know what to do about that. That night, after Chloe went to bed, Mason sat on the back porch and called the one person who might understand. His sister Rachel answered on the third ring. Mason, is everything okay? Yeah, sorry for calling so late. Opa, it's 9:30. That's not late. What's going on? Mason didn't know how to start. He and Rachel had talked maybe once a month since Sarah died, brief conversations about Chloe or logistics or surface-level things that didn't require emotional honesty. I think I'm starting to feel things again, Mason said finally. Rachel was quiet. Then she said very gently, That's good, isn't it? I don't know, it feels wrong, like I'm betraying Sarah by not being miserable anymore. Mason, Sarah loved you. She would want you to be happy. You know that, right? Knowing and feeling are different things. Yeah, they are. Rachel paused. Is this about someone specific? Maybe. I don't know. There's a woman, my boss actually, and we've been spending time together, not dating, just dinner sometimes. Talking. And I realized tonight that I care about her. Not just professionally, actually care. And I don't know if that's okay. Why wouldn't it be okay? But because Sarah's only been gone 3 years. Because Chloe's still processing her mother's death. Because I don't know if I'm ready to care about someone new when I haven't finished grieving the person I lost. Rachel let out a long breath. Mason, grief doesn't have an expiration date. You don't finish grieving and then move on. You carry it with you. And eventually, if you're lucky, you learn to carry it alongside new things. New happiness. New love. New life. What if I'm not ready? Then you're not ready. But don't use grief as an excuse to stay stuck. Sarah wouldn't want that. And honestly, neither should you. They talked for another hour about Sarah, about Chloe, about the 3 years Mason had spent surviving instead of living. And by the time Mason hung up, he didn't have answers, but he had clarity. He wasn't betraying Sarah by caring about Vanessa. He was honoring her by remembering that life was supposed to include more than just work and parenting and going through motions. Sarah had loved him enough to want him to be happy, even if that happiness looked different than it did when she was alive. 2 months passed. The military contract progressed smoothly. Production ramped up. More helicopters rolling off the line, each one meeting specifications, each one a small victory against the doubt that had nearly destroyed Holt Aerotech. Mason's relationship with Vanessa evolved slowly. More dinners, more conversations that went deeper than work. More moments where Mason caught himself noticing things, the way she laughed, the way she listened to Chloe, the way she looked at him like he was someone worth seeing. Nothing romantic, nothing that crossed professional lines, but something building. Something neither of them acknowledged, but both of them felt. In April, Chloe's school hosted a robotics showcase. Parents and students filling the gymnasium, dozens of projects on display, proud kids explaining servo motors and programming logic to adults who nodded and pretended to understand. Chloe's project, an improved version of her sorting robot, had won regionals and was competing at the state level. She stood beside her display, demonstrating for anyone who would watch, glowing with the kind of pure joy that made every sacrifice worth it. Mason stood back, watching his daughter teach a group of parents about sensor calibration, and felt pride so intense it hurt. "She's amazing." Mason turned. Vanessa stood beside him, dressed casually, looking out of place among parents in jeans and school t-shirts. "What are you doing here, Mason?" Mason asked. "Chloe invited me, sent me a very formal email through my assistant. Said she wanted to show me her robot. She didn't tell me she invited you." She said it was a surprise. Vanessa smiled. "I hope that's okay." "Yeah, it's okay." They watched Chloe demonstrate her robot, watched her answer technical questions with confidence that came from actually understanding her work, watched her win third place in the showcase despite being the youngest competitor by 2 years. Afterward, the three of them went out for ice cream. Chloe talked non-stop about her robot, about next year's competition, about improvements she wanted to make. And Mason sat there listening, watching his daughter interact with a woman who wasn't Sarah, but who cared about Chloe in a way that felt genuine. And he realized something he'd been avoiding for months. He was falling for Vanessa Hale, not because she was beautiful or successful or because she'd given him his job back, but because she saw him, really saw him. The broken parts and the healing parts, and the parts that were still figuring out how to exist in a world without Sarah. And she didn't try to fix him, didn't try to rush him, just existed alongside him, patient and honest and waiting for him to be ready. That night, after dropping Chloe at home, Mason texted Vanessa, "Thank you for coming today. It meant a lot to Chloe. It meant a lot to me too. Your daughter's special, Mason. You're doing a good job." Mason stared at the message, then typed something he'd been afraid to say for months. "Can we have dinner sometime? Just us?" The 3 dots appeared, disappeared, appeared again. "Like a date?" "Yeah, like a date. A longer pause this time. I'd like that." They went to dinner the following Saturday, not the diner, somewhere nicer, a restaurant with tablecloths and wine lists, and an atmosphere that made Mason feel underdressed even though he'd worn his best shirt. Vanessa arrived 5 minutes late, apologizing, looking nervous in a way Mason had never seen from her. "Sorry, I couldn't figure out what to wear. Changed 3 times. You look great. You're lying, but thank you." They ordered food, talked about work at first, safe territory, before the conversation shifted to more personal things. Vanessa talked about her father, about the pressure of living up to expectations she'd never asked for. Mason talked about Sarah, about grief, about learning to be a single parent when he'd never planned to parent alone. "Do you think about her every day?" Vanessa asked quietly. "Yeah, but it's different now, less painful. More like remembering something beautiful that's gone instead of constantly mourning something I lost." "Does Chloe talk about her?" "Sometimes, less than she used to. I think she's forgetting details. Her voice, little mannerisms, and I don't know if that's healthy or heartbreaking. Maybe both." "Yeah, maybe both. Vanessa reached across the table and took his hand. The gesture was simple, but it felt significant, like crossing a line they'd been dancing around for months. "I'm not trying to replace Sarah," Vanessa said. "I could never do that. But I'd like to be part of your life, if you'll let me." Mason looked at their hands, at Vanessa's face, at the honesty in her expression that matched what he was feeling. "I'd like that too," he said. "But I need you to understand something. Chloe comes first. Always. If this doesn't work, if it becomes complicated, if you wake up one day and realize you don't want to be with someone who has this much baggage, I need to know now. Because I can't let Chloe get attached to someone who's going to leave.
I'm not going anywhere, Mason.
I don't make promises I can't keep. How do you know you can keep this one? Vanessa squeezed his hand. Because I've spent 6 months watching you be a father. Watching you prioritize Chloe even when it cost you. Watching you be present and patient and everything a parent should be. And I realized I don't just admire that. I want to be part of it. That's not an answer. Yes, it is. I'm choosing you. Mason, you and Chloe. I'm choosing the complicated, messy, beautiful thing you're building together, and I'm promising I'll show up for it. Mason felt something break open in his chest. Not pain. Relief. The kind that came from finally admitting you didn't have to carry everything alone. Okay, he said. Let's try this. They left the restaurant and walked through downtown, talking about nothing and everything, holding hands like teenagers who'd just discovered what that meant. At the end of the evening, standing beside Mason's truck, Vanessa kissed him, soft and careful and full of promise. And for the first time in 3 years, Mason let himself believe that happiness wasn't something he'd lost forever. It was something he could build again. Different than before, but real. But his. 6 months later, Mason stood at the edge of the airfield, watching the sunset paint the sky orange and gold. Behind him, the hangar hummed with activity, engineers finishing the day's work, helicopters being prepped for tomorrow's flights, the constant rhythm of a company that was thriving instead of dying. Vanessa stood beside him, her hand in his, watching the same sunset. The board approved the expansion, Vanessa said. We're opening a second production facility, hiring 200 more employees. This company's going to be okay, Mason. It was never about the company. It was about you believing you could run it. Maybe. But having you here helped. I just fixed helicopters. You did more than that. You reminded me what leadership actually looks like. Taking risks, trusting people, fighting for what matters instead of what's easy. She turned to face him. You changed everything, Mason Reed. We changed everything, together. Behind them, a car pulled into the parking lot. Chloe climbed out, running toward them, backpack bouncing, face lit with excitement. Dad, Vanessa, guess what? I got accepted into the advanced robotics program. They said my application was the best they'd seen from someone my age. Mason caught her in a hug, spinning her around, feeling joy so pure it burned. That's amazing, baby. I'm so proud of you. We should celebrate, Vanessa said. Dinner, ice cream, whatever you want. Can we get pizza? And can we eat it here? I like watching the helicopters. Bomb martinis. They ordered pizza and ate it sitting on the hood of Mason's truck, watching aircraft land and take off, talking about robots and engineering and all the things Chloe wanted to build when she grew up. And Mason sat there between his daughter and the woman he was learning to love, watching the sky darken and the runway lights come on, and he realized something important. Grief hadn't destroyed him. It had just convinced him that survival was the same as living, but they weren't the same. Survival was getting through each day without breaking. Living was building something new from the pieces of what broke. Living was letting people in. Living was choosing hope even when fear felt safer. Sarah had wanted him to keep living, had made him promise. And for 3 years he'd broken that promise because he didn't know how to honor it. But he knew now. Living meant being Mason the father and Mason the engineer. Living meant building helicopters and raising his daughter and falling in love with a woman who saw him completely and chose him anyway. Living meant carrying grief without letting it define everything else. Living meant being brave enough to be happy again. Dad? Chloe said, interrupting his thoughts. Are you okay? You look sad. Mason pulled her close. I'm not sad, baby. I'm grateful. For what? For you, for Vanessa, for helicopters and second chances and all the things I thought I'd lost that found their way back to me. Chloe hugged him. Mom would be happy, you know. That you're not sad all the time anymore. I think you're right. They stayed until the last light faded from the sky. Then they drove home together, Mason and Chloe and Vanessa, to a house that felt less empty than it had in years. And that night, sitting on the back porch while Chloe slept and Vanessa dozed beside him, Mason finally understood what Sarah had been trying to tell him 3 years ago. Keep living. Not because grief goes away, but because life is too precious to waste hiding from it. Keep building. Not because building guarantees success, but because trying matters more than being safe. Keep loving. Not because love can't hurt you, but because the risk of hurt is worth the possibility of happiness. Mason looked at Vanessa, at the woman who'd forced him to remember who he used to be, who'd waited patiently while he figured out how to be that person again. And he made a new promise, not to Sarah this time, to himself. He promised to stop hiding, to stop pretending survival was enough, to stop letting fear make decisions that hope should be making. He promised to keep living, really living. The messy, complicated, beautiful kind of living that hurt sometimes but mattered always. And as the stars came out above upstate New York, above a house that held a sleeping child, and a woman who'd chosen to love a man still learning to love himself, Mason Reed finally believed that promise was one he could keep. Because sometimes the bravest thing you can do isn't fixing what's broken. It's admitting you're broken and building something new anyway. It's choosing to be vulnerable when being closed feels safer. It's trusting that happiness isn't something you lost. It's something you create every day with every choice to show up and try again. Mason had spent 3 years believing his story ended with Sarah. But he understood now that stories don't end. They just change shape. And the shape his life was taking, father, engineer, partner, survivor who'd learned to live again, was something worth fighting for. Something worth believing in. Something, finally, worth calling home.